Uranium's the type to do a half-assed job during the day and spend every night doing Jaeger bombs and blasting Kendrick Lamar. You know the type.
I am Tyler Fultz. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Today we're going to be looking at a video called Why Thorium Rocks by the Sam O'Nella Academy. That is a fun name. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, can I tell you a secret? Come here. Closer. Nuclear energy? It's not a bad thing. Sure.
It's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing.
Years ago, things like
I love this little artwork. 3 Mile Island, the little cooling towers, and Chernobyl with the Toys R Us are minor detail. 3 Mile Island actually happened in 1979, but sure, I get the premise.
Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island were certainly something to worry about. Today, however, it's a different story. Let me tell you kids about thorium. Thorium is uranium's neighbor.
Did he? Yep. So uranium, mailbox 92 with thorium being 90. That's a reference to the periodic table atomic numbers. That's pretty good. I like that.
2 houses down. He's a lot like uranium, just he's a lot more chill. Uranium's the type to do a half-assed job during the day and spend every night doing Jaeger bombs and blasting Kendrick Lamar. You know the type.
Well, Kendrick Lamar is going to date this video, but that's pretty good.
Thorium, on the other hand, is more career-oriented, and at the end of the day, he's cool with just watching Netflix, eating Ben & Jerry's. Let me walk you
I prefer Bluebell myself, but I get it.
through all the steps of nuclear power, and you'll see why thorium is so great. Let's start with mining. So when somebody doesn't feel like getting at
Now that's interesting. He's going to start with mining. Very few people that talk about nuclear talk about this dirty aspect of the job. That's just mining. It's dirty like mining anything else. Let's see what he says. This is cool.
bed, they'll, whine and moan and roll over. Likewise, when uranium doesn't want to get out of bed, he releases deadly cancer-inducing radon gas. This means workers have to put up expensive ventilation systems just to...
Of course, uranium's got to be green, right? And radon gas. So radon gas is a safety hazard in mining, but doesn't come from uranium. It's just a gas that comes from various other geological deposits. It can even exist in people's homes where they have like radon detectors, anything underground. Not uranium specifically. Yeah, it's a hazard that you got to worry about in mining, among other hazardous gases, engulfment hazard, things of that nature. Yeah, mining's just a dirty, dirty business. But it doesn't come from uranium directly, but it can come from actually mining uranium, just like from mining anything else.
Not die. Thorium's chill. You go to wake him up, he understands he's got a job to do. Goes without a fuss. And even when you do get uranium up, like the lazy bastard he is, he has much less concentration in his ore compared to thorium, so more work has to be done just to get the same amount of material.
So the part about the gas, now, that really just depends on where the location of the mine is. I think what he's getting at, now I'm not a mining expert, is thorium is more likely to find in deposits that you can have like an open pit mine instead of one that's closed off. There's less of that engulfment, gaseous hazard. But the real benefit of mining thorium is there's 3 times more of it, so you don't have to do as much mining to get that resource. So it's more of just about natural abundance than anything else, is why thorium's better to mine.
Earth's crust also has much more thorium in total than uranium, about 3 times as much.
Okay, so he gets at that. Okay, fair enough.
So you got your ore, and you've extracted it. Ready for work, right? Wrong. You see, natural uranium mainly consists of 2 different isotopes, uranium-235 and uranium-238.
It's actually even less than that, more like greater than 99% of U-238 and less than 1% U-235.
8 kind of sucks at life, So uranium has to undergo enrichment to up its concentration of 235. Uranium's kind of like that kid with ADHD, right?
Oh,
You got him in the building, but you still got to give him his own little room and a couple Ritalin before he starts doing anything productive. That's expensive. Thorium, on the other hand, look at him. He's got his sneakers laced, glasses on. He's ready to go.
But thorium doesn't, it's not ready to go. It doesn't fission by itself. Well, maybe he's going to get into that, but you need to have like plutonium or uranium or something to help it along, basically. Let's see if he gets into that.
Enrichment needed. Finally, you're ready to make some power. This part's important, kids. Pay attention. So this is where the biggest difference between uranium and thorium comes in. You see, uranium is fissile, whereas thorium is fertile. This means you.
So clarification, fissile means it will readily undergo fission. Uranium-235 specifically, like you showed, that very small concentration that you have to enrich, that is fissile. Other things that are fissile are plutonium-239. One general rule of thumb, not 100% accurate, but if it ends in an odd number, it's generally fissile. Compare that to uranium-238, which is fissionable, which it can fission under a fast neutron, which are a lot rarer, and you don't typically rely on those to sustain your nuclear reaction, but it is physically possible. Same thing with thorium-232. It is actually fissionable, so if you want to place them in a reactor that operates primarily using fast neutrons, it would work. But fertile, what it means is decay products down the chain will fission. So it can be used to make fuel, but it does need something to help it along the way, like plutonium or...
Uranium can do his job all by himself, just doing his thing all on his own. Whereas thorium's kind of a cripple. He needs a little bit of someone else just to give him
Okay. He gets it.
push he needs to start releasing energy. This might sound like a bad thing, but if you think about it, it's a lot safer. If you've got your power production process started and shit suddenly hits the fan,
How's it safer?
uranium's just going to keep going. You can try to move him around, cool him down or whatever, but at the end of the day, this man's going to be swinging.
That's not even what most people consider dangerous. It's very easy to shut down a reactor. Reactor protection system, all control rods fully insert, less than 2 seconds. It doesn't take much to shut it down. Even if they fail, most reactors are designed in such a way that if the temperature goes up of the reactor coolant, so they talked about cooling it down. If the temperature goes up, that is what's known as a negative reactivity coefficient. And basically what that means is it's going to shut itself down if temperature gets up. There's an inverse relationship between temperature and reactivity. Reactivity being acceleration. So steady state, reactivity is 0. You're raising power, reactivity is positive. Lowering power, reactivity is negative. So this particular type of runaway reaction, that's not even what you mostly worry about in nuclear reactions. So I'm not really sure how he says it's safer.
It's not going to be a good day for anyone. Thorium, he's only got one leg. Piss him off, he takes a swing at you. Just push him over, you're good. Please note, Salmonella Academy does not condone pushing cripples. And that's what thorium reactors do. They allow the barely radioactive liquid thorium to drain away from its helper in the event of an accident, so there's no way for things to escalate.
Okay, so he's talking about passive safety systems. Now that's a real thing, and yes, thorium reactors can be designed this way, but so can reactors that use uranium. Small modular reactors, for instance, it will just shut itself down if it overheats, like I mentioned earlier. So this is really more of a function of reactor design than uranium versus thorium. Thorium's so new, though. If we were to deploy it at scale, we're talking brand new reactor designs, which the newer reactor designs for uranium would also have passive safety systems. So we're kind of at a wash here in terms of safety. Both of them are highly safe, and I would like to run either or both type of reactor.
much safer. But while the process for thorium is better, most of the time people care more about the results. Well, it just so happens thorium is pimpin' in that regard as well. CERN estimates that 1 ton of thorium is capable of producing as much energy as 200 tons of uranium. That's a lot. To compare,
Now he's talking natural uranium, not enriched uranium.
it's also equivalent to 3.5 million tons of coal.
And that goes to show you just how much better nuclear power in both situations is just so much better than coal or other fossil plants.
But let's talk about byproducts. Thorium, being as pure as it is compared even to enriched uranium, produces about 100 times less nuclear waste. So whereas we might not have as many X-Men, that also means much less work has to be done to dispose of the material. Additionally, it's
So the thorium by itself would, but you're still using that little bit of plutonium as well, or uranium in some case. But that is one advantage, is less fission products by volume.
difficult to make a nuclear weapon out of thorium since it can't do much on its own. The only thing that's really weaponizable about
The
thorium
plutonium.
plants is that little bit of helper material I talked about earlier. But overall, that's a pretty minuscule amount. That means we
So while plutonium amount is smaller, plutonium is a lot more energy dense than uranium and can be used in its relatively small quantity to make a nuclear weapon compared to uranium, which you'd have to enrich. So we talked about enrichment earlier. Is you'd only have to go to 2 to 4% for a reactor. You'd have to go upwards of 90% if you're going to use uranium to make a nuclear weapon. But plutonium, you don't need nearly as much material. So while it's less volume, there is that increased risk of making a weapon using plutonium. But I'm one of those people that think the risk of proliferation is largely overblown. It's that same reason why we don't recycle our fuel in the United States, because of the byproducts of recycling. Because we could get a lot more fuel utilization out of our uranium if we just recycled our fuel. So, but there's just that concern about proliferation, at least within the US.
feel a lot better about plopping these plants down in places like Iran. So kids, you heard it here first. Thorium is the future. Powerful, clean, reliable, and if things go wrong at the end of the day, you can still kick its ass.
So what do you think? Do you think thorium is the future? What I'd like to think is that it would be some combination of thorium and uranium. They don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive, because uranium is still, in terms of readily accessible resources, we already have mines for it. We already have operating experience using it. We can use thorium as well. I'd like to see, especially if we build a lot more nuclear power plants, the demand for thorium will increase to the point that we would start building these plants, learning how to use them better. I would love to see more uranium and thorium plants. One other advantage that he mentioned, but he didn't mention earlier of thorium, was he talked about the fewer amount of fission products. Fission products are what generate that decay heat that would eventually lead to fuel damage, fuel melting, overheating if you completely lost cooling. So with thorium, there would be less of that. Anyways, I'd like to see both of them. Let me know what you thought. If you're team thorium, team uranium, or team both, let's crank out these nuclear power plants as fast as we can and as safely as we can. Today we're going to be looking at another one of Sam O'Nella's videos on fire diamonds. Now, in a nuclear power plant, we actually use these fire diamonds quite a lot for various hazardous or non-hazardous material that we store, chemicals, solvents, basically any big industrial stuff. Though at nuclear plants, you don't use them as often as you would at, say, a petrochemical plant. But we still use these things quite a bit. Here's what it looks like for real, in case you're curious. Just a simple 0 to 4 scale of how dangerous something is with health, fire, instability, and specific hazards. Just high-level safety message. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, today I'll be teaching you how to read these things. The symbol is technically known as NFPA 704, but nobody really
That's great. He got the terminology right.
calls it that. Most people refer to it as a fire diamond or a safety square. Or if you're British, a figmenty pigmenty crosser tosser, whatever floats your boat. Anyway, when you see the symbol, usually on a door or a container or something, it means there's a hazardous material present. And the numbers and symbols on the diamond give information on exactly how dangerous that material is. So first off, notice the 4 colors, right? Each one represents a different type of hazard. Red is for flammability because fire and burning things are usually red. Yellow is for chemical reactivity, I guess because chemical reactions involves swapping electrons and electricity is yellow.
So reactivity, this is different from reactivity associated with nuclear reactors, strictly chemical stuff.
Blue is for health hazards because fuck you. And then white is just extra space for other stuff. So the 3 colored diamonds, or if you want to be politically correct, the African American diamonds, each have a number from 0 to 4. And each of these is like a threat level for that category.
That scale of you're good damn son is actually fairly accurate for the most part because it's supposed to be a quick arbitrary telling of how dangerous something is. The only exception would be the fire portion. That has to do with flashpoint. It actually has numbers on there. Like a 4 means it has a flashpoint of less than 73 degrees, so anything could make it catch fire.
If the number is 0, it basically means you'd have to be some kind of professional to manage to fuck things up in that fashion.
Some kind of professional. That is awesome. Yes. The most experienced folks tend to make mistakes because of complacency and overconfidence. There's like a sliding thing. It's the amateur and the most professional are probably the people you got to watch out for.
Sand, for example, has a 0 in its flammability. The only time sand burns is when it's wedged in the cracks of your Speedo for too long. However, please note that the health section does not apply to ingestion. For example, motor oil has a blue rating of 0, but that in no way makes it safe to drink. If the number is 1, that means there's a threat present, but you'd still have to be like an advanced level dumbass in order to really find it. Cellulose, the primary chemical found in paper, has a flammability of 1, so don't, hold it over a fire for a while, and you'll be fine. 2 is where things start being kind of a big deal. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes pepper spicy, has a health risk of 2.
I love these examples, very like sand, paper, examples that show up to just about everyone. That's a good way to do a safety brief.
You finish chopping your jalapenos, and then you go touching your jalapenis. It's not gonna kill you or nothing, but it's gonna mess your day up for sure. If you see a 3, that's when you know you gotta watch out. Gasoline, it's got a flammability of 3, and we all know gasoline. You see gasoline walking by, you better take the cigarette out of your mouth, get the static off your clothes, fix your hair, make yourself presentable, don't make eye contact. That's the only way to keep yourself safe. And then 4 is the highest number on the scale. If you see a 4, the best thing to do is just start walking backwards, because if you're close enough to read that 4, chances are you're not where you need to be.
Some nasty green stuff. By the way, that's not what nuclear waste looks like. I don't know what that green stuff actually is, but ugh.
Nitroglycerin has a reactivity of 4. If you soak a tissue in nitroglycerin and give it to your friend to sneeze in, that sneeze will result in his entire goddamn face getting blown off.
4s
so yeah, 4s are nothing to sneeze at. Literally. Now let's move on to the bottom bit. Unlike me, this diamond isn't just a big white waste of space. This is the spot for any extra warnings you need to know about. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, like radiation, or biohazard, or gaze. So
wow, that did not age well at all.
I'll just go through a few that aren't as easy to interpret. Take a look at this one. Unless you hear faint mooing while you're reading it, chances are it doesn't mean what you think. OX is short for oxidizer, which is basically something that produces oxygen when exposed to heat. This doesn't sound so bad until you realize that heat plus oxygen rarely ends well for most fuels in the vicinity. If you see this one, it means white people aren't allowed to touch the material.
Wow.
Just kidding. White people are allowed to do whatever they want. It actually means don't mix with water, or else it could explode or multiply or something. Ese means simple asphyxiant, referring to gases like helium. It basically means that while this gas isn't poisonous, it's also, not air. So if you breathe it for too long, you will still die.
It's true.
Alright kids, so now that you know all the ins and outs of these things, let me give you a little quiz. On the left we got a bunch of things, and on the right we have a bunch of fire diamonds. Pause the video now and see if you can match them up correctly.
Alright, let's see if we can do this. So sodium metal, well has a volatile reaction with water, so that's going to be the second one on the right with the W on it. Shrinking alcohol, flammable and health risk, but not that high, so that's going to be on the bottom right. Nitrogen gas is an asphyxiant, but no real other hazards there, so that's going to be straight across. And hydrogen cyanide, volatile and deadly, so that's going to be the one on top. And my mixtape is the fictitious 050. Wonder what 5 would be. Flashpoint at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. Must have a hot mixtape.
All done? Here are the answers.
And it looks like we got them. Awesome. Good to know that training amounted to something.
Now you know all about NFPA 704. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
All right, now I gotta convince my safety manager that this should be included for our NFPA 704 refresher training that we have every year. I wonder if we'll go for that or not. I love this. Any way to make safety fun and entertaining while at the same time really talking about the hazards is a win in my book. This was excellent, and I really think this should be included in safety briefings at work. Let me know what you think about that. Would you include this in your safety training? Have Sam O'Nella discuss it? Today we're going to be looking at another one of the fine Sam O'Nella Academy videos called Obscure Units of Measurement. The nuclear power industry has tons of obscure units of measurement. I wonder if Sam O'Nella happened to capture a few of these. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, I've been told by a lot of people that there's nothing more exciting than the metric system. They may have a point, but I can still prove them wrong. Today, we're going to talk about some specific lesser-known units of measurement.
Man, the metric system. So learned everything I learned about, say, the critical parameters for a nuclear power plant in college was all in metric. But then when I went to the commercial industry in the United States, it was all the so-called English engineering units, which is a bit ironic because even the British don't really use pounds and feet anymore. They've also gone over to the metric system, but that was a bit of a curve, just swapping from one to the other.
First is the Schmidt Pain Index. Now, anybody could tell you that getting stung by a bug tends to hurt, but just how much does one sting hurt compared to another? Are yellow jackets worse than hornets? Are fire ants worse than honeybees? Nobody in the world of science knew for sure. Have you guys heard of this one? That is, until a young upstart by the name of Justin Schmidt decided to boldly go where no entomologist has gone before. But how did he plan to quantify the level of pain caused by different insect stings? Well, it went something like this. Alright, honeybee. Ow, God, that hurt. I'll give that like a 2. Next, paper wasp. Okay, that's like a 3. Next.
No, wow, that would be like having me expose myself to potentially lethal amounts of radiation just so I can create my own measuring scale of that. Not doing it, not going to tell anyone else to do it. This is crazy.
Let's try bullet ant. Jesus Christ, Mary Mother of Satan's left nipple, it's like my hand is made entirely out of urethras, and each and every one is having a red-hot catheter put in and ripped out 5 times every second. My very being is on fire. No. My only desire left is for death himself to bless me with sweet relief. I'll give that a 4.
Just a 4.
4+. In all seriousness, though, I'm pretty sure the index is meant to be logarithmic, like earthquake magnitudes. So just like a magnitude 7 earthquake is 10 times as powerful as a magnitude 6.
Is that? So I know it's exponential, but I think it's even more so. Like 8 would be 1,000 times more powerful than a magnitude 6. So 7's going to be 33 and some change more powerful than a 6.
A bullet ant sting causes 100 times as much pain as a honey.
I do see his point, though. Yeah, very good.
In total, Schmidt catalogued 78 different species of the order Hymenoptera, which includes ants, bees, and wasps. You can tell a man is really dedicated to his job when, after getting stung by 77 insects, he says to himself, you know what? That wasn't enough. I need one more creature to inject its venom into me, and only then will this list be complete. I guess you could say he just really gave a Schmidt. Next.
Wow. All right, so now I'm going to share you an obscure nuclear unit of measure. It's the unit of time. Nuclear reactions are so fast. We created a unit called a shake, like shakes of a rabbit's tail. One shake is 10 nanoseconds, or 10 to the minus 8 seconds. Crazy fast unit. You can thank the Manhattan Project for that one.
The Waffle House Index. So for those of you that didn't know, the Waffle House is one of the most resilient establishments in the world. Whereas most restaurants would simply close down in the event of, say, a hurricane, Waffle House just goes from their normal mode to disaster response mode, following extensive protocol that allows that location to keep serving customers in spite of low food supply or even a power outage.
That is so true. I've seen like crazy snowstorms, hurricanes where the Waffle House is still open. I've heard of this as a concept, but I never knew it as an actual scale.
In response to this business practice, FEMA came up with what is known as the Waffle House Index, which is a system to easily assess how badly an area is damaged by a natural catastrophe.
And that is how you know your business is successful, when a government organization that specializes in emergency management uses your business as a guide. Awesome.
Waffle House is fully open, they're in the green, which means things are basically fine. If the Waffle House is using their low supply menu, you're in the yellow, which means that the area is almost certainly mid-disaster. Finally, if you're in the red, that means the Waffle House is either closed or gone. Now that's a sign of some real nuclear zombie holocaust type shit.
That's crazy, a red. So I'm thinking during the Chernobyl accident, it was maybe just a green or a yellow, since that was short of the whole nuclear zombie apocalypse thing. Just a radioactive release. But yeah, can you imagine if there were Waffle Houses over there?
Going down, so if you're not already dead, you should probably vacate the area. Most engineers could tell you that, structurally speaking, the triangle is the strongest of all shapes.
Yep, specifically the equilateral triangle like the one shown here, and that's just because it distributes its weight evenly across all three of its sides. So you'll see it in like trusses, frames, bridge construction, anything where your job is to support a lot of weight.
But I believe that there's one shape that's even stronger. Godspeed, Waffle House. Next we have the Apgar score. So the Apgar score...
So before we get into this, I'm going to go over another obscure nuclear unit. The barn, or 10 to the minus 28 square meters, which is about the size of the target area of a uranium nucleus. This one is also from the Manhattan Project, and it's kind of the expression of trying to fission one with a neutron, kind of like trying to hit the broadside of a barn.
Is a rating system used by hospitals to determine how healthy a newborn baby is on a scale from 0 to 10. It's called Apgar based on its 5 criteria, which include appearance, pulse, grimace, activity, and respiration. And each of these is rated on a scale from 0 to 2 to get your final score. Personally, I think this set of standards is a little flawed. Here's an example. Well, it's completely blue, and it doesn't really want to move at all, but it's got a really fast heartbeat, and it's screaming really loudly. I'd give this baby like a 6 out of 10. That's good enough. So in response, I've invented my own rating system. It's called the Ragu score. R is for reflexes. It's common knowledge that if you hold any healthy baby by its feet and then drop it, it'll always land upright. If your baby can't do that, that's a sure sign that it's defective. A is for abnormality. If your baby seems weird, that's typically a good indicator that it's weird. G still stands for grimace, just like in the Apgar test, only instead of looking at the baby's facial expression, you just bring grimace from McDonald's into the room and see how the baby reacts.
Now that one's accurate. Grimace is terrifying.
Starts crying, that's a good sign, because grimace is absolutely fucking terrifying.
100%
and finally, U is for ugliness, just because that might sway your decision on whether or not you want to keep it. Now, if the baby passes the test, it gets to go home, but if it fails, then it gets shipped off to the factory and made into Ragu, hence the name of the test.
I'm pretty sure Ragu didn't sponsor it. That's horrible. I'm going to distract you with one last nuclear measurement. The dollar. At $0, the reactor is critical. Steady state, it's on, it's producing reactor power at and holding the same power level. Between $0 and $1, the reactor is supercritical and is increasing in power slowly, like during a planned reactor startup, for instance. Everything is perfectly safe and controlled. $1 or more, that is prompt critical, or how nuclear bombs are designed to operate. The order of nanoseconds, or even a few shakes, the nuclear reaction increases exponentially. You go from microwatts to megawatts in a few shakes. That's what nuclear bombs are supposed to do. That's actually what happened at Chernobyl as well. But Chernobyl had such a small enrichment, and the design of the reactor, they still had it spaced out enough that the geometry was impossible for it to make an actual atomic bomb. But it's still scary to think about of having a reactor go prompt critical or over $1. A modern nuclear reactor, it is impossible for it to exceed $1. It'll just have a few cents there when you want to raise its power level.
Some people might be upset by this fact, but you know what they say. Prego today, ragu tomorrow. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
I had no idea about these units of measure. The Waffle House I've heard of, but I didn't think it was an actual unit. That's really interesting. Let me know if you've heard of any of those three that I mentioned, or any of the three nuclear ones that I mentioned. And hey, if you want to see some safe $0 to $1 nuclear power production, please join me on my journey to a sustainable nuclear energy future by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella Academy's videos. This one is on where animals' scientific names. I was also told this is where he talks about the origin of the names of ionizing radiation units. Sounds intriguing. Let's take a look.
Anyway, we all know about the scientific names of animals, but did you ever wonder what they actually mean? To find out, we must look to taxonomists. They're the guys responsible for the systems of nomenclature we use to classify organisms, and boy are they convoluted. First you got the big 8, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
That's interesting, because I've never heard of domain. Now, it always just started with kingdom. Now, this is me in high school, so I may just be showing my age, but domain must be a new one.
Plenty of mnemonic devices for this, but since the D just showed up in the 90s and is still disputed by some scientists,
in the 90s? Okay, I take that back. I'm not that old. My high school just might not have taught me that.
Usually not included, so allow me to suggest a few. Dizzy kids puke cereal on fairground staff.
Sure.
Dumb kittens pushing cups over feeds growing spike. Donkey Kong's fucking serendipitously.
Oh my, I was not ready for that one. Is this the real reason why you wanted me to watch this, when you wanted to see my reaction to that bit of insanity? I'm gonna need a moment talking about Donkey Kong's Donkey Dong. I love Donkey Kong games as a kid.
The way this whole thing works differs slightly depending on which kingdom you pick, so today we'll be sticking to the animal one, cause that one's the coolest and I'm in it. So what constitutes each taxon is pretty arbitrary. They basically just serve to act as another set of branches in the tree that taxonomists build. The one exception is species, which is generally defined as any group of animals that can have babies with each other that aren't sterile freaks. Mule, liger, zedonk, skunk ape, they can live fulfilling lives, but they're all shooting blanks, so they don't count. On the other hand, in our innumerable trespasses against God, we can make things like chidandanes, which actually work, so dogs are dogs are dogs. Besides species, though, it's the Wild West in here. Plenty of times, 8 tiers isn't even enough for scientists, so they just stick new sublevels in between. Legions, cohorts, tribes, series, divisions.
I've never heard of any of those, but I'm not a biologist.
If you want to keep going, you can throw all kinds of prefixes.
Giga, magna, parv, nano. I know micro and nano are 10 to the minus 6 and 10 to the minus 9, but that's about it.
on any of these for even more layers. There's even subspecies, which the more pedantic of you may think to yourselves that creating names for subspecies at all kind of undermines the single somewhat agreed upon definition in the whole tree. To that, my friends taxonomists say, But while that's pretty complex,
Yep.
the actual names themselves are pretty easy to wrap your head around. Though taxonomists may hide behind their fancy Greek and Latin, the Vulgate is no substitute for wit. Now, I've scraped through the scientific names of a load of species, and most of them can be split into a few categories. The simplest ones are the animals that already have names in Greek or Latin. It's a lion, I'm calling it Leo. Done. Tiger, it's a tigris. Cat, it's a caddis. Easy.
Caddis.
Multi-word names can be translated the same way. For the golden eagle, we got Aquila chrysaetos. Gold eagle eagle. They decided to be a show-off and do eagle in
Twice the amount of eagle to gold.
and Latin, essentially the same though. But if a species is too specific or exotic for a one-to-one translation, that's when you gotta get a little creative. A lot of the time, inspiration comes from just giving the creature the old once-over and pointing out some cool-looking body part. Generally, the more distinct of an identifying feature it is, the more likely it'll get in the name. For example, Homeboy took one look at this thing and said, yup, red triangle slug. I'm going on break. We called this thing a fucking unicorn, almost like that means one horn or something. Also, some guy deadass looked at an octopus and said, well, all the
Did he just say dead ass? I don't even know why.
got is heads and feet. I'ma call them headfoot. Now biologists everywhere say cephalopod unironically. Matter of fact, if it's got feet, chances are that's part of its name somewhere. You got 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 2 feet, equal feet, both feet, double
I like
feet,
that.
stomach feet, lip feet, sucker feet, wing feet, big feet, slow feet, or feet, both feet, joint feet, no feet, 10,000 feet, cow's feet, spade feet, cat feet, small feet. If it doesn't look that interesting, another thing
That
to
was
point
so
out is where
good.
you found it. This could be a territory like American bear or Siamese crocodile, or just a habitat like woods macaque or toilet rat. But that's boring. We need to look at the men behind the magic and what drives and motivates them. Now, if there's one thing that the scientific community loves, it's clout. And there's no better
Yep.
way to go down in history than plastering your own name on some shit you found. But not all fields have the same volume of things to scribble the old John Hancock over. On the one end, you got physicists just making up their own slightly different
Yes, that is how it works. Let's delve a bit deeper on radiation units. First one is activity. Think of it as disintegrations per second, which is what 1 becquerel is. That's the most commonly used unit. A curie is a massive unit of 37 billion becquerels. Now, I don't know if that's a reflection on her contributions to the community of physics compared to becquerel, but that's just very interesting. Another unit is the Rutherford, which I've never actually used before. It must be a pretty old one. 1 million becquerels. Nice round number, but like I said, never seen it used. Then over to exposure. And when you think of exposure, you're thinking of actual ionizations caused by the ionizing radiation. So the SI unit for that is coulombs, which is a unit of charge, divided by kilograms, which is a unit of mass. Makes sense when looking at, a specific amount of ionizations. A Röntgen, which you've probably seen from HBO's Chernobyl series, is smaller than that. 2.58 times 10 to the minus 4th. Now on to absorbed dose. Think of what a target physically absorbs, whether it's a person, an animal, or just a surface material. 1 rad is the basic unit, and then you have Gray, who was 100 rads. Rad's a pretty big unit. And then on to dose equivalent. That is absorbed dose multiplied by a quality factor. And we hear the basic unit is rem. Depending on what the radiation is, depends on what the dose equivalent is compared to just absorbed dose. For gamma radiation, 1 rad is 1 rem. It's that simple. For alpha particles, though, 1 rad is 20 rem. And the physicist here is Sievert, which is 100 rems. These are big units. 1,000 rems is a fatal dose. Even less than that is often a fatal dose, or just 10 sieverts. Most commonly unit I've seen in terms of this was either in rem, millirem, or micro sieverts. So these are pretty big units.
ionizing radiation measurement, and even then only the top dogs got away with it. Now zoology, any little goober flouncing through the underbrush can say, this one has 13 spots, but the one in the book's only got 11. I will call him Splinkus's ladybird. Alternatively, plenty of biologists have given shoutouts to their contemporaries, both other biologists and those across the academic gamut, from geologists to physicists to explorers and more. Naturally, Darwin's
That's
got
so
a shitload,
interesting.
but even the background characters get immortalized one way or another, who are Thompson, Grant, Summers, Sommering, Erlanger, Speak, and Cuvier? I don't know, but they've all got gazelles, so they must be pretty cool. Of course, other times, the name checks go to people who had fuck all to do with anything except for one taxonomist being a fan of theirs. Plenty of popular celebrities have species named after them, but since all the big cute stuff was found and branded a while ago, most of these idols are commemorated through repulsive little invertebrates. You got Scaptia, Beyonce. The only similarity I can gather here is queen bee.
That face!
Looks like a bee, both not a real bee. There's Anomphilus gregarius, an old stone named after an old stone.
Wow.
In 2007, one Jason Bond, a professor of biology at UC Davis, dubbed this little dude Myrmecia Neil Youngie to honor his favorite musician, which caused my man Stephen Colbert to go on TV and profess his utter indignation at not having a spider named after himself. So naturally, the next year, Bond actually went on the Colbert Report to announce the naming of apostachus Stephen Colbert. So, if that gives any of you epic biologists out there any ideas, you know, I wouldn't be opposed. Please, I would do anything. For the love of God, I'll even take a lichen. The world of politics is by no means immune to this phenomenon. Obama alone has fucking 9, as do a load of other presidents. Trump's got a moth with funny hair, Bush has a fungus beetle, Reagan's a wasp, Carter's got a darter, and so forth. Even Austria's most famous painter got the honor through this blind cave beetle. Mind you, it was 1933, so you can only blame the guy a tiny bit. Hitler actually wrote him a letter saying, "Oh, thank you, my little entomolomensch," and then went on to do, you know, Hitler things. Fun fact, not only was this beetle stuck with just about the worst name you could have, it's also now facing extinction solely because of its value to Nazi memorabilia collectors.
That is so crazy how just adding a word or a name can cause something to go like that. Though things don't always have that case. Like I know sales of Corona Light actually went up after COVID, back when we called it coronavirus. One thing that still bothers me is the expression going nuclear means you're about to do something crazy, unhinged, and possibly hurt a whole bunch of people and everything that stands in your way. Whereas going nuclear should mean, hey, creating a safe, clean, reliable, sustainable energy source for the benefit of all of humankind. Go ahead and give me a like and subscribe and comment if you want to join me on that journey, making nuclear. I was going to say making nuclear great again, but I'm not sure I want to go there.
Guess old habits die hard. Oop, fictional characters have their fair share of species under their belt. On the topic of evil beetles, this one's named after Darth Vader because he kind of looks like his helmet, I guess. This was actually named by the same guy who did the Bush one and belongs to the same genus. There's also this mite, genus Darth Vaderum, which is a lot more accurate and frightening. In 2012, a single bone from above the eye socket of a hitherto unidentified theropod dinosaur was being studied. And suddenly, under the light of the full moon, the guy working with the specimen had his neck covered with hair and his lips clenched into a pog and his endocrine system filled with soy, and he said, "It's just like the eye of Sauron." What? And then he started chewing on Funko Pops and sweating cream of meme and snorting G Fuel and shitting D20s everywhere until the prostate stimulation made him. The dino's genus is now Sauroniops from...
I don't know what that... I'm guessing a slight the sort of people that are into D&D. I never got past the first level when I tried playing D&D with some roommates in college.
Sauron. This spider was named after Godric Gryffindor because it looks like the Sorting Hat. SpongeBob has not a sponge, but a fungus.
Terrifying.
The legendary birds from Pokemon each have their own, you guessed it, beetle, and the list goes on. Scientists are nerds. Who knew? Anyway, while this all seems kind of chaotic, there is some method to the madness. One rule is the principle of priority. This states that once somebody publishes their chosen name for a species for the first time, that's the name, and other taxonomists typically can't change it. This has led to plenty of misnomers coined by whoever got their foot in the door first, particularly in the case of the guys doing this stuff before we had the luxury of genetic analysis. Here's one. Red panda? Nah. Shining cat, coined in 1825. To be fair, they're actually about as close to cats as they are to actual pandas, so whatever. Here's 2. Capsicum chinense. Eaten there? Sure. Native? Only off by around half a globe, where literally all hot peppers came from. This principle holds true even if someone thinks they've found a new species, only to later discover that it was already named. For example, in 1824, one John Edward Gray documented the plain zebra, calling it Equus burchellii, or Burchell's horse, named after a renowned naturalist of the day. Little did he know, back in 1785, some other douche classified this character as the quagga. The last quagga died in a Dutch prison in in 1883. So, why do
Wow.
we care? Well, in the 2000s, scientists decided to scrape some gunk off a dry quagga pelt and study its DNA. And from that, they realized, wait a minute, apparently this guy and zebras could have, made a little plaid in the hay together. So technically, they're one species. And today, they're both called quagga. Sounds kind of asinine, but then again, so does asinus, and that worked out fine. Just to maintain the distinction, the extinct subspecies was renamed quagga quagga, so you know it's the real quagga. This double naming convention has been done with a lot of subspecies, in fact. Wild horse, spotted panther, or my favorite, gorilla.
That's awesome. This kind of reminds me of how buffalo is a complete sentence. I'll link that in the description.
Yeah, it's the gorillest gorilla that ever gorilled. Fuck you want from me? A closely related rule also states that the names of all taxa have to be unique. So if two people coincidentally name any taxa on the same thing, the older one gets to stay and the new one gets the boot. Like if you saw a genus called echidna, you'd think it was, an echidna, right? Well, no, that'd make too much sense. For a while it was true, from 1797 to 1811. Then it was pointed out that someone else already called a genus of moray eels echidna back in 1788. So the real echidna had to be changed to tachyglossus, or quick tongue. Then a decade later, a dude did the same thing for a genus of vipers. Another 22 years passed, people discovered the same thing, and they were renamed to Bitis cause they bit us. That one at least made a bit of sense given that the original echidna from Greek mythology was half lady, half snake, but who cares at this point?
That's crazy. I mean, it's just, and yeah, because in like the 1800s, 1700s, it took a while for these things to be communicated. It wasn't internet back then. It's kind of like if only we invented the internet before naming animals. That's just funny.
I've just barely scraped the surface of all the goofy names out there, so feel free to post more down below. That's all I've got for now.
That was crazy. I never knew all those stories behind animals' names. My favorite is probably still gorilla. I like the little shout out towards the ionizing radiation names and just a bunch of physicists trying to show their clout. Today we're going to be looking at another hilarious Salmonella Academy video on history's worst non-water floods. In nuclear power, we prepare a lot for all forms of natural disaster, including flooding, hurricanes, earthquakes, and yes, in some cases, actually floods and hazards that are not from water. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, if you've been on Earth for any amount of time, you should know that this place is pretty wet and wild. With water just falling from the sky whenever it feels like it, it's no surprise that floods are among nature's most common means of wrecking.
I love how he describes it as like, yeah, it's just something that happens every now. His delivery is beautiful.
Humanity's hard work. However, not every flood has been made out of plain old H2O. Today, we're going to talk about some of the few non-water liquid disasters that mankind has endured. January 15th, 1919 was a particularly warm day for Boston, at around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the freezing temperatures of the past week. Men wore their hats a little less snugly, children huddled about the fire a little less closely, and a metal tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses decided to collapse. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sam, I've never even held a molasses before. I didn't know there was 2.3 million gallons of it in the world. What was that much molasses doing in one place? Well, young grasshopper, as with most things, the answer is alcohol. As the cylinder came tumbling down, it unleashed a delicious brown tsunami that was 25 feet high at its peak. Also, forget everything you know about idioms, because the waves were recorded to have moved as fast as 35 miles per hour. That means you're slower than molasses. Nerd. Add that.
That's true. It's heavier, thicker, and it's gonna be so much harder to escape than water, just because you get trapped into stuff, and being submerged in that, you can't swim in it. It'd be horrible to get caught in that wave, as goofy as it is.
The fact that molasses is way more dense than water, and you've got a recipe for some major destruction. Eyewitness accounts of the event describe houses being swept off their foundation and subsequently demolished. The level of damage was comparable to a tornado sweeping through, its path of devastation stretching a half-mile long.
That's just one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, is how devastating water can be. So molasses, you're getting something heavier and thicker that's going to cause so much more damage, and there you have it, the Boston Molassaker. I hope that's actually what they called it. I have no idea.
A picture of something.
I can't tell what it was supposed to be. All I know is that molasses clearly does not play. That's not all, though. A truck was picked up and chucked into the harbor, a train car got knocked off its tracks, and a bunch of dogs and horses just straight up drowned. Oh, and some people, too. Around 150 were injured and 21 were killed in the disaster. Yeah. Talk about the sweet release of death, am I?
That would cause, it could cause, well, one in an urban area, but so much more deadly than, the 2 million gallons of just water, of molasses, and people just aren't as prepared to know how to deal with it.
A couple of reasons these numbers were so high were that A, once you're stuck in something that thick and sticky, you're kind of fucked unless 3 guys with a rope happen to show up, and B, the affected area was so large that 3 guys with a rope would have no way to get to you without getting trapped themselves. True. As a result, rescuers had to wait several days before the molasses either sufficiently drained out of an area or hardened up enough in the sun and the cold so that it could be walked on without sinking in. After the incident, cleanup was carried out primarily by blasting the streets with salt water, which took many weeks and stained the waters of the Boston.
That makes sense, because you need to just dilute it somehow and use a less viscous fluid to deal with the more viscous fluid. Sure.
Were brown for months. Naturally, all the rescue workers and cleanup crew ended up getting molasses all over them, which led to them getting the stuff all over payphones, subway cars, door handles, you name it. It's said that for decades afterwards, residents could still catch a whiff of molasses outside during the summer months, and Boston remains one of Forbes' top...
What is this list? One specific Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. Oh, Danny DeVito trade. Oh my.
10 stickiest places to this day. Our next tale took place on the evening of June 18th, 1875 in Dublin. A fire had been raging across several blocks of the city for many hours prior, and like many of us do after a long hard day of wreaking havoc, the fire decided to mosey on over to the malt house for a much needed drink. Around 5,000 barrels of whiskey and other social lubricants subsequently burst from the heat, sending a cascade of what is essentially liquid fuel careening out into the street, carrying the inferno on its back wherever it went. Now, normally you think people would just run away from the impending danger, but being that this is Ireland, the crowds of people had a better idea. They said, hey, fellow upstanding citizens, why don't we band together and, help with the cleanup efforts? So they decided to dispose of the river of beverage running through their neighborhood by hiding it safely away in their stomachs. Some people drank directly from the street, while the classier among them were seen taking off their nasty sweat-filled boots, filling them up, and just gulping away. Keep in mind, while today's version is flavored primarily with cinnamon, this Fireball whiskey contained a special blend of spices including ash, street filth, tiny shards of glass and wood, and whatever else you could imagine. But
Ragu.
Free drinks are free drinks. In the end, 13 people perished as a result of this incident. Was it from the fire? Nope. Smoke inhalation? Mm-mm. Drowning? Still no. Unfortunately, though they did boot, and they did rally, they forgot to do both at once. As a result, all 13 deaths were actually from alcohol poisoning caused by chugging too much runaway liquor. So let this be a lesson, kids. Wow. Don't drink street booze. You have no idea where it's been. Just go to a dispensary instead. Moving along.
So one thing I just want to mention is, so these scenarios are pretty crazy and off the wall, but after Fukushima happened, every nuclear plant in the United States put additional measures in place for what is known as a beyond design basis accident, such as Fukushima, because in Fukushima, they just weren't designed to handle a wave of that magnitude and an earthquake of that magnitude. The key point, though, is there is no specific initiating event that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission describes as, because every plant's situated in a different location and different hazards they have to worry about. So after Fukushima, the additional modifications that were put in were additional diesel generators, other power supplies, other power transfer switches to make sure the site didn't lose power to their safety systems and all of their myriad backup safety systems. So our sites are even more secure, and you need electrical power in just about every situation. So could even say after Fukushima, we are more prepared for these crazy floods of Lord knows what that could come after the plant.
Here's another potation inundation, this time on the other aisle. 1814 London was a rapidly growing metropolis, and like all metropolises, it had its fair share of densely populated slums, one of which was St. Giles Rookery. And what better place is there to build a brewery than amongst the impoverished...
St. Giles Rookery is probably one of the most British things I've ever heard, and I've lived there for a few years, so...
and thirsty. Unfortunately, said brewery apparently got cocky and decided to skimp out on their iron rings that hold up the big beer things budget, leading to one of the vats completely collapsing and knocking over all the others with it.
So, they probably wouldn't have had it for beer, and certainly not back in the 1800s, but there are grades of piping. ASME grade, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and we have the highest grade for critical systems such as our reactor coolant systems and any big safety-related tanks that carry important chemicals and other assets that are, designed to help the nuclear power plant do its job. So they probably didn't have those back in the 1800s, though. I don't even think ASME existed at all.
Total, around 323,000 imperial gallons, or 1.5 million liters of beer were unleashed that day. The flood of ale pushed over the wall of the brewery with the same ease that Jared Kushner pushes old ladies down escalators, gushing out into the streets and totally demolishing multiple homes situated nearby. Good morning, America. I'm reporter Pat Lauer. No relation, don't worry. We're here at the scene of the world's biggest party foul. Ma'am, how does this whole thing make you feel? Ha! Don't worry, this isn't the first time alcohol has torn my household apart. In all seriousness, my husband has struck me on multiple occasions. At least 8 people are known to have died as a result of the incident, either from drowning or from having their house dropped on them. In spite of this, nobody was held responsible for the disaster, with courts concluding that the collapse was an act of God. I wish people were that lenient with act of God clauses today, like, alright, here's your coffee, ma'am. Whoops. Jesus Christ, it burns! Yes. That was Jesus Christ who did that. You motherfucker, my legs are fusing together! Hey, God works in mysterious ways. Maybe you were supposed to be a mermaid, who knows? So, I hope...
Wow. Think of the implications of that. If that had more act of God or force majeure clauses in contracts. You imagine that for something like Chernobyl? Just an act of God. It's fine. No, that one right there was a combination of a poor design and even worse operators, what led to that horrible accident.
Knowledge of these events will serve to empower you in your life going forward. If you find one of your friends trapped in molasses, now you'll say, don't worry, I'll save you. In a couple days. If your street is ever flooded with hard liquor, you'll say, oh boy, time to start chugging. In moderation, of course.
Those were some crazy examples. Do any of you guys know any more crazy non-water floods of hazardous chemicals or even just silly stuff like the alcohol examples that he mentioned? But it's crazy how things like this, because we're just less prepared, we know a bit more how to handle floods of water. And if you're downwind of, say, or downstream of a dam, for instance, you have more evacuation procedures, so we can be more ready to respond to those sort of things. But like I said earlier, our nuclear power plant fleet is more prepared to handle any type of crazy beyond design basis accidents, including, if a river of booze were to approach the plant. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Sam O'Nella Academy's videos on mass hysteria throughout history. Now, where have I seen mass hysteria before? Let's check it out.
Hey kids, if you've ever been Black Friday shopping or visited the Diablo subreddit recently, chances are you've encountered mass hysteria at some point. Mass hysteria is known medically as mass psychogenic illness, or MPI for short. It's basically just when a bunch of people start acting a fool for no discernible reason other than maybe a stressful environment. Being that
maybe that's it, because, as far as the anti-nuclear stuff, if you listen to the science behind it, the solutions we clearly have for waste are long-term storage, a safe, clean, reliable energy source. There's really not much in the way of logical reasons for being anti-nuclear. By the way, if you support safe, clean, reliable nuclear energy, please join me on a journey to securing a clean nuclear energy future by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you very much.
Sort of thing is naturally very noticeable. There's loads of documented cases found all throughout history. Let's take a look at a few. This first one is what made me make this video in the first place. So one day sometime in the Middle Ages, a group of nuns in a French convent were enjoying a quiet, uneventful day until one of them decided to start meowing. You know, like a cat. You'd think this would last all of 4 seconds before another nun was like, "Excuse me, Sister Gertrude, would you kindly cut the shit?" But instead, another nun joined in, and another, until basically the entire nunnery was exchanging mouths like a group of communist trading card enthusiasts.
Is this where those guys in Super Troopers came up with that whole right meow gag? I've never heard of this mass hysteria event.
This wasn't just a one-time thing either, it basically became integrated into their way of life. It said that on a given day, they would stand there meowing in each other's faces for hours at a time. Could you imagine being the first outsider to witness this? You might laugh now, but as they say, everybody gangsta till the nuns start meowing. I'd void my bowels and move to Malaysia without even thinking. Miles more terrifying than this pile of garbage. As you can imagine though, after a while it stopped being scary and just got annoying, leading to the neighbors calling in a band of soldiers to deal with the situation. Hey guys, can we talk to you for a sec about Yeah,
that was scary.
All due respect, but we have orders to literally beat the hell out of you with whips till you start acting like people again. Sorry, sir. It's just force of habit. Haha, habit. Seriously though, we would rather go to hell for throttling a gaggle of nuns than put up with another minute of your bullshit, caprese. Our next event took place in the parish of Fatima, Portugal in the year 1917. It all started with 3 shepherd children, ages 10, 9, and 7 respectively.
That's salamander juggling. Okay, that's pretty good.
They were like, "Greetings, fellow Portugueseites. We've been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary, and she told us to tell you that some real crazy shit's gonna go down in the sky on October 13th. Now, if 3 random farm children started spouting out prophecies to the public today, you'd say, "Ha, what tomfoolery. Go play in some dirt, you dirty little dirt baby." But keep in mind, the past is a different country. And Portugal's a different country, so that's like different country squared you gotta think about. Plus, this was during World War I, a time where a lot of people were holding out for a miracle to begin with. So the kid's story was actually picked up and even spread by local newspapers, to the point where, when the day finally came, at least 30,000 people gathered in Fatima to witness the alleged miracle. Lo and behold, on that
I love these little side annotations he's got here. They make the video even funnier.
Day, the sun began zooming around, careening towards Earth and sending rays of multicolored light cascading across the sky, creating a light show like nobody's ever seen. Keep in mind, this happened in the 20th century, way after the era where belief in divine jiggery and or pokery was considered mandatory. So naturally, there were plenty of skeptics and non-believers present, and even they saw it all happen. Or so they thought. How do we know the sun didn't really whiz around haphazardly that day, Well, number 1, use your frickin' brain. And number 2, accounts differed wildly from person to person. While some say the sun zigged hither, others say it zagged thither, and others still said it shined a brilliant yellow and stayed perfectly still. As such,
on the notes of the colors of the sun, part of it's just how we perceive it from Earth. I heard that, like, relative to other stars, the sun is actually more closer to like orange or green or something else than the yellow we experience on Earth. So this whole different colors, in this case it's silly, but there is a little bit of that kind of depending on your frame of reference, what the sun looks like, what the color is, that sort of thing. It's not as cut and dry as you might think.
Eventually concluded that the event was just a combination of MPI and weird eye stuff from too much sun staring. Although I'd like to believe it was real, just that Jesus' illusion skill was way higher than his alteration at the time. Yep, that's it. Sam's going to hell. Why, for blasphemy? Trust me, that was the least offensive part of that joke. Our next tale took place in 1962 in Tanganyika, which was basically just the beta version of Tanzania. The nation had just declared its independence from Britain the previous year, and with the future so uncertain, tensions were naturally running high around this time. One little girl in a Tanganyikan school ended up handling the stress in a bit of an unusual way. Rather than overeating or staring at her ceiling for hours like a normal person, she just started laughing, and laughing, and laughing. Pretty soon, her classmates
Wow.
at the all-girls school she attended began to join in, to the point where 95 of the 159 students caught the gigglies, which...
By the way, these are all even crazier examples than the whole anti-nuclear thought of mass hysteria. Or are they? Are they both about as crazy? What do you think?
lasted anywhere from a few hours to 16 days straight. Beyond just the unprovoked cackling, other odd behavior included aimless running and
such good
occasional
animations.
violence. The problem got so severe that the school was forced to close down temporarily,
Wow.
leading to the chortlers roaming the streets, spreading the affliction further. Thousands
I mean, it sounds funny, but this would also just be terrifying. You know that one, he did that little spooky thing with the nuns earlier, but yeah, it's one of those things that I'm sure it would be funny for like a few minutes, but then when you realize what's going on, it would be terrifying to experience one of these events propping up.
of people from all strata came to be affected, with 13 additional schools being shut down in the progress. Over the course of the hysteria, several other symptoms began to present themselves as well, ranging from obvious ones such as breathing problems, fainting, random screaming, to more anomalous things like rashes. Despite all this,
Really?
no physical cause could be
Wow.
found, leaving MPI as the only explanation. The epidemic finally died down.
I mean, on that note, I mean, if it's a mental thing, mental illnesses can manifest physically. So, rash, other physical symptoms like digestive systems, irritable bowels. So, yeah, I can see that happening as a result of something that origins as a mental thing. It's crazy.
After between 6 and 18 months of day in, day out laughter, depending on the village. While this whole thing likely sucked for most people involved, it probably could have been worse. A lot of the time when I'm alone, I'll think to myself, man, if I ever go full schizo, I hope I'm one of the laughy ones.
I had one instance of a visitor to a nuclear plant, not my nuclear plant, but this was discussed amongst, of someone that went into a radiological controlled area. Now that just means it's controlled. You go in there, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to dangerous levels of radiation or even any levels of radiation depending on where you go, but it's controlled, so you're required to have a brief with radiation protection technicians prior to entry. And this one guest, he didn't get any dose. He was well monitored. You wear a dosimeter to see where you go, and they didn't go near any radioactive systems. And he had this crazy psychosomatic reaction that he was getting sick, like stomach illness, because he went into what is considered a radiation area, even though he did not receive any dose. And I wonder if there's definitely some of this stuff going on, and that rash example that he mentioned earlier is not surprising to me, that various fears, mental things can cause physical responses. It really is fascinating. Kind of like in The Matrix where they say your mind makes it real.
One of the screamy ones. With this story in mind, just maybe, if I put my mind to it and believe hard enough, I can be both. Flashback to the year 1518 to the city of Strasbourg, at the time part of the HRE. A woman named Mrs. Trophy began fervently dancing in the streets for no discernible reason, for hours.
Love
then
that
days.
animation.
All without music, of course. Her only breaks consisted of occasional food intake and passing out from exhaustion when night came. If you saw that today, you'd just be like, ha! Drugs. But apparently people found it pretty inspiring, because within a week, 34 others had joined in, and after a month, there were around 400. This wasn't your casual
Wow.
bobbing up and down neither. This shit made Zumba look like Tai Chi.
Earliest
Here's
crazy
the best
flash
modern day
mob.
simulation I could find. Now imagine that both of those people were the
man.
same person, and you got the dancing plague. This would take a toll on any healthy person, let alone a medieval city dweller. But despite bleeding feet and aching bones, they just kept
My
going.
goodness.
In fact, they went so hard for so long that a good portion straight up fucking died from cardiac arrest. It got to the point where around 15 dancers were kicking the bucket every day before the city decided they had to do something about it. They managed to rule out any divine or supernatural causes, which was necessary just because,
crazy.
back in medieval times, It's fucking stupid. They eventually surmised that it was a natural disease caused by too much hot blood, as per that whole
Hot
four
people
humors
juice.
thing that was popular at the time. As for a cure, their prescription was, get this, more dancing. I can see where they were coming from. It's pretty sound logic.
I'm surprised it wasn't bloodletting using leeches. Wasn't that a thing? Your blood, your humor's not in order back then?
A song stuck in your head, you play it till you're sick of it, same kind of thing. But here's where they goofed. The authorities actually went out of their way to facilitate the dancing, setting up a big stage area and even hiring musicians to keep the afflicted moving. All this achieved was attracting more passerby who were like, man, mass psychogenic illness looks frickin' epic, let's get in on that, causing the contagion to become even more widespread. Seeing that their solution backfired, the city then went the other way and completely banned any public dancing. Those who
Maybe that's why they did what they did in Footloose. He heard about this story. I've never heard of this one either.
showed signs of the mania were subsequently carted off to the Shrine of St. Vitus, where an exorcism-like ritual was performed on them. This ended up being highly effective, presumably for no other reason than that the dancers believed it would work, and after nearly 2 months, the plague was quelled. While this whole thing was most likely a case of good old-fashioned MPI, some historians believe it might have been egged on in part by ergotism, a state of psychosis brought on by eating tainted bread, which I talked a little bit about in this video. Ding.
Wow, those were crazy. I mean, this mass hysteria stuff starts off, I mean, I cracked up on hearing the descriptions, but now it's more of a scary sort of thing, and with underlying how these physiological symptoms can emerge from a psychological thing, and it can be crazy. I've never witnessed such an event. Let me know if you have. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella Academy's videos on obscure, obsolete inventions. A lot of them exist in nuclear power plants, so let's take a look.
Hey kids, if I learned anything from my middle school career, it's that what may seem like a good idea initially will often be remembered only as a foolish mistake. Here's a few pieces of technology.
I've seen that thing where it's like, hey, who 3D printed the save icon? What does it say? Gotta go destroy. That's awesome. Gotta love the floppy disk.
Yesteryear that have since fallen into total obscurity. So I've always believed that there's no point in having many small things when you can have one big thing. Why have many shrimp when you can have one lobster? Why drink many glasses of milk when you can eat one udder? Why have many cheese-its when you can have one cheese them? Patent pending. And
What if that has anything to do with cheese nips?
I have many street lights when you can have one moonlight tower. These guys were real popular back in the 1880s and 90s, often standing at over 150 feet tall and illuminating several blocks from a single point. Not very well, mind you. Matter of fact, they were so dim, we didn't even have the conscience to just call them light towers. Had to go and stick the moon on the front so people didn't get their hopes up. But thanks to our good old friend, the inverse square law, you still needed a fuck ton of light to pull this off. So
the inverse square law also applies to radiation dose. After all, light is a form of radiation, and visible light is a form of radiation too, just not ionizing. And yes, that means your eyes are radiation detectors. It's cool stuff. But yes, you double the distance away from the source, the dose goes down by a factor of 4.
Use incredibly harsh and UV-emitting arc lights instead of
That's terrifying.
all the light of the moon and all the vision damage of the sun. Talk about a win-win. Sadly, these beasts have fallen by the wayside over the past century or so, except for in Austin, apparently, but they use friendlier mercury vapor lamps in them, so they only get half points. Now, anyone who's been around a baby
It's kind of like high mass lighting you see over freeways and stuff, but I guess it's just dimmer.
long enough knows they always have a cloud of ghoulish stench hovering around them. Jeez Louise, somebody better air out that musty little muskrat before Grandma starts drooping again. You could stick him on the clothesline for a while, but no,
Wow.
a little moron. I'm sure he'd find a way to hurt himself
Oh,
somehow.
no.
Introducing the baby cage. Finally, city dwellers all across the nation have a way of unleashing their postnatal funk on the unsuspecting passerby below. These were in vogue for a while before falling out of style a bit of the way into the 20th century, because apparently society started deeming babies more valuable than air conditioners. I don't really get it personally, but this is also around the time we started putting lead in gasoline, so
Maybe that's how John McClane was raised as a baby in there, so he got used to clawing around air ducts.
probably for the best we kept him inside all day. Matter of fact, it's my firm belief that without kids growing up breathing lead, there's no way pet rocks would have taken off in the 70s. Wow, alienating baby boomers. He's so brave and controversial. Now, in the days between the Great War and the not as great but still pretty alright war, people were trying to find efficient means of detecting an incoming air attack. They climbed their nation's tallest mountains to seek the wisdom of their greatest elders, and the wise men said, big ears. So that's what they did. These giant discs were known as acoustic mirrors and were designed to focus incoming sound over a 5-meter diameter into a single point. They were reasonably effective as
That's so old
devices.
school.
A few of them in Britain were able to pick up the sound of the plane from all the way across the English Channel. Of course, radar came along soon after, rendering these things completely useless beyond looking brutalist as hell. For real, instant album cover material right here. Ah! One of the Pep Boys is pulling a Spanish Inquisition on this poor wayward harlot. Huh. Just kidding. Despite the fact that this looks so very, very much like a state-of-the-art instrument of torture, it's actually just a beauty micrometer. Think those shoe size measurer things at Foot Locker, only instead of one primitive measurement, it records the entire topology.
Wow. Chin cleftiness, philtrum distinction, nostril oblongosity, general dumpiness index, or GDI. Maybe whoever invented this was part of the Brotherhood of Nod.
Face and skull at once. With this data, a trained cosmetologist would be able to pinpoint exactly what features of your head should be enhanced and reduced with makeup in order to achieve a maximum calculated attractiveness after you've paid for their services. Clearly this device must have been effective. After all, beauty is entirely objective. What, eye of the beholder? Check the name tag. Apparently, though, women didn't like being strapped into a birdcage and having their every minute flaw meticulously laid out in front of them, so this thing never really took off in the end. Next we
I'll share a couple that are from nuclear. You know those old school orange plasma screen TVs from the, or not TVs, but just screens from the 1970s? Yeah, we still use those at my plant, and it's because the cost of upgrading is so cost prohibitive. It's the nuclear equivalent of going on eBay and finding a bunch of age-old technology just to replace those screens whenever they go bad. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, the other bits in the control room still use those old analog gauges that you see in movies like the China Syndrome. I mean, they have some digital stuff in plant computers as well, but those old things still exist. And we even still use old school electronics that have master and slave relays. Now, I probably can't even say that. Yeah. The good news is, good luck hacking a nuclear power plant because it's too primitive to hack. It's like a reverse Independence Day.
The Umlauf. This was a device made during World War II designed to let infantry shoot around corners. It's like the Germans sat down and watched that part in Tom and Jerry where the conniving rat has the gun barrel back at his adversary. They said, Mein Gott. They came in a variety of angles between 30 and 90 degrees, and even came with a little periscope so you could see what you were shooting at. But as we all come to find out when we reach adolescence, cartoons are the arbiters of deceit. These things would invariably break within the first couple hundred shots or so. And even when they did work, the rounds would fucking explode from the massive acceleration, turning a deadly bullet into an ineffectual spray of shrapnel.
That's true. When you turn a corner like that, all that energy is imparted upon that surface. So yeah, the bullet's not going to survive at anything even approaching high velocity rounds.
So ineffective that only the 30-degree model ever saw significant production beyond prototypes, and even that was very limited. So you ever look at regular mouse traps and go, not enough property damage. Check this out. Patented in 1882, it's the revolver mousetrap, brought to you by the makers of the snail trebuchet and the cockroach claymore. Thanks to the marvels of the modern era, all those tiresome hours of intense varmint slang can be outsourced to one little gadget on the floor of your kid's playroom. Now,
that is so crazy.
Of the night, you can rest easy knowing that one way or the other, there's one less pest for you to deal with in the morning. Boom, 1850. Steam locomotives are all the rage. You're in the transport business, but all you can afford is a couple dumb horses. Sure, they move things from point A to point B almost as well at a fraction of the cost, but your cool rail riding friends called you a whack ass and it really hurt your feelers. Well, if we got the
feelers.
The Impulsoria uses an ingenious system of treadmills to turn that horse to be beckoned into a force to be reckoned.
with. Sure, it's expensive as hell to make and limits your
That is
services
awesome.
entirely to railroads, but just look at it. Instant pussymobile. Slap some rims and a spoiler on there and you're laughing. This machine is recorded at having a maximum output of 2 to 4 horsepower, which sounds about right. And it didn't.
I mean, yeah, 2 to 4 horses.
Exhibitions. Now, if there's one hobby that people in the past enjoyed, it's smoking. Whoo boy, did they like smoking. And with great wholesome activity comes a million novelty items to go along with it. Everyone's seen the long cigarette, but how about the really long cigarette? Want to smoke in the rain? Here you go. Going snorkeling? Hey,
The
you know
little
what's more
umbrella.
important than oxygen? Nicotine. But hey, want to know the only thing better than a cigarette? 2 cigarettes. You know what? Fuck it. Have the whole pack. You earned it. Of course, if you're trying to cut back, you can always share it with a friend. Aw, how heartburning. But you know, it's
Heartburning.
an addiction.
Man, I like those, all those ones from the 1800s, the time of wacky inventions. I guess nuclear power back in the 1800s would have been splitting atoms using really, really small hammers. It's a bit of a joke when I talk about some of my really old coworkers that's how they split atoms back then. Anyway, I really like this. I'm fascinated by old-timey engineering as well. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella Academy's videos called Historical Misconceptions for You to Bring Up During Family Dinner. And just for fun, I'm going to throw in some nuclear misconceptions. Let's take a look.
Hey kid. Yeah, you. I just got off the phone with the big man upstairs. And he told me that I need to clear a few things up.
Wikipedia.
So without further ado, here's 10 pieces of malarkey that you might still be spreading. Number 1. Nobody was ever burned to death at the Salem witch trials. Of the
Interesting.
accused, 15 died in prison, 19 were hanged, and 1 was squished to death. That last one is way more interesting than any cremation, by the way. Dude was a badass. His name was Giles Corey. He was 81 years old and so done with the town of Salem's garbage that he wouldn't even dignify the trial with a plea. So the town stuck him between 2 boards and stacked
Wow.
rocks on top of him in an effort to draw out a confession. But every time they tried to get something out of him, all he would say was, "More weight." This went on for 3 solid days until he finally
Wow.
died, never giving
What a way
any
to go out.
indication as to whether or not he was a witch. One can only wonder. Number 2.
All right, the first nuclear misconception I wanted to talk about were these cooling towers right here spitting out radioactive material. Now, it's just water vapor. They're in the steam cycle of the nuclear power plant, which is the same steam cycle that exists in natural gas and coal plants and has been around for the past couple of 100 years.
The OG Buddha wasn't the obese guy. That's Budai, a Chinese folk character
okay.
meant to represent Maitreya, aka future Buddha. Now this shirt
I
is
didn't
double
know that
sad.
one.
Number 3.
Another misconception is you get a lot of dose from living near a nuclear power plant. That's not the case. We're talking 0.005% of background radiation. You get 100 times more dose from a coal power plant and over 200 times that amount from flying from New York to Los Angeles.
Buddha wasn't a god either. He was just a guy named Gautama. Now this shirt is triple sad. Number 4.
Here's another one. Critical does not mean the reactor is about to explode. Critical means the reactor is on and at a stable power level. It's funny how it's the exact opposite of what that misconception says.
Ever heard of a vomitorium? Turns out, no. It's
I have, actually.
Roman nobles
I'm studying
would go
ancient
to make
Rome.
room for more pheasant spleen and lobster eyelids. It's just a big entranceway to the Colosseums
Yep.
that hordes of people spew out of. Number 5.
Here's another misconception. A nuclear power plant can explode like a nuclear bomb. No. Even Chernobyl, they went prompt critical, so it's almost like they tried to make it a nuclear bomb, but nope, the reactor just tore itself apart and shut itself down as a result of that crazy test. They just don't have the enrichment nor the placement to create conditions that could create a nuclear bomb.
Washington never cut down a cherry tree in his youth. I don't get this one at all. Apparently it's supposed to paint the...
Yeah, I remember this story.
Somehow. It's like, Tyler, what the hell happened while we were...
He's talking to me.
Where's the tree in the front yard? Oh yeah, that was me. Got bored. Just felt like vandalizing something, you know? Hey, what about my honest character? Number 6.
Here's another one. Nuclear power is unsafe. No member of the public within the United States has died as a result of nuclear power. And this is a time period that spanned over 50 years. So your office building is less safe than nuclear power.
The pyramids weren't actually built by slaves. These workers were...
I knew this one, yeah.
Society. They ate meat.
Skilled laborers.
3-month shifts, and even got to be buried right next to the tomb after their death. Matter of fact, that's more than we can say for the people working on man's greatest achievements today. If I spent years of my life helping to build the space station, you're damn right I'd want the Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle floating along.
That's awesome.
That would be amazing. Number 7.
Another misconception is Chernobyl can happen again. No. That reactor type is rare. It only exists in former Soviet Union countries, and no new reactor of that type is currently being built. And even the ones that exist now, they made modifications. They made modifications such as removing the graphite control rod tips that was a contributing cause of the accident, and several other modifications to prevent that sort of thing from happening, even in those sort of reactor types. If you want more information, I highly recommend you check out my reaction video series to HBO's Chernobyl.
Great Wall of China is not the only man-made object visible from space. I don't know where you dipshits got this one from. First of all, there's no way you could see it with the unaided eye. The wall is like 30 meters thick at most, while the distance to outer space is generally recognized to be 100 kilometers up, known as the Kármán line. To give some perspective, that's like me holding up a standard-sized guitar pick from across the entire length of a football field and asking you what color it is. Also, there are plenty of man-made objects that are way bigger in terms of local surface area than the Great Wall. So even if it was visible, there's no way it would be the only one.
Yeah, when I think of structures visible from space, how about just our infrastructure? All the lights that you see when you just look down on the Earth from the space station. Here's another misconception. Uranium and nuclear fuel is this weird green glowy stuff that you would see on an episode of The Simpsons. So this is what uranium metal looks like. This is what nuclear fuel looks like. More boring, sure, but not that green glow.
Hey, you might have heard this one before. You know, Hitler was a jerk and all, but hey, he made the Autobahn, so at least he was efficient. Hitler didn't create the Autobahn. It was already there. He just helped expand it into newer territory. In a similar vein, Mussolini didn't make the trains run on time, with most of Italy's infrastructure repairs happening before his rise to power in 1922, and even then they weren't nearly as punctual as he'd like you to believe. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to find something else to like about these fascists.
Wasn't it that under Mussolini the trains were actually less efficient than they were previously? I'm not sure about that, but the inefficiency in these fascist governments is astounding. Another reason to not like these.
Hitler's elegant way of speaking. Or the way Mussolini says spaghetti.
What? Here's another misconception about there being no plan for dealing with nuclear waste. So 96% of it is recyclable. And we're talking stuff like contaminated gloves and protective clothing that you wear. And the high-level stuff are things that you see here in these dry cast containers. These things are super durable, can withstand severe weather and even direct missile strikes. They're perfectly safe just sitting on a pad outside.
9. Iron Maidens weren't actual torture devices used in medieval times. Basically what happened is, some archaeologists in the 1800s saw an old metal coffin and some spikes, and said, yo, wouldn't it be wild if we put these things up in here, so that way if someone goes in it, they get poked in their bits? You are a sick man, Cornelius.
I didn't know it was this much later.
Into the museum it goes. At least Iron Maiden was real. They were as real as it gets. Still are. And don't you forget it. Number 10.
Here's another misconception, that wind and solar can replace nuclear. No, those two generation sources are too susceptible to things like the sun shining or the wind blowing. I'm not anti-wind or anti-solar. They do have a purpose within our energy mix, but they can't do the base load that nuclear does.
Einstein never failed math. He had mastered both integral and differential.
I remember being taught this, and it didn't make any sense.
Chance, this one was just made up to make glue eaters feel better
Maybe.
about themselves. Well, congratulations, Dimitri. Looks like you failed pre-algebra for the 3rd time. Brady still can't graduate. Well, hey, that means I'm still on par with famous smart science man, so, yeah, worship me. So So it just goes to show that
Wow.
we've got a lot to learn about the world around us.
Those were a good list of misconceptions. I didn't know that one about the Iron Maiden or the two Buddha-related ones. So really appreciate Sam O'Nella's stuff, just learning things, presented in a silly way. I just love it. Let me know down in the comments if you have any other nuclear misconceptions, both ones that you know are misconceptions or things that you believe are misconceptions and would like me to clarify. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Sam O'Nella Academy's videos on why produce used to suck. As we know, some bits of produce, such as bananas, are radioactive. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, you've probably seen this scene in TV or movies at some point. A couple of people end up stranded on a desert island, totally isolated from all civilization. It seems like there's no hope for survival, but then one of them looks 3 feet to the left and, oh my god, it's a tree full of fully grown, plump, delicious, smiling, golden-skinned bananas. Amazing. We're saved for the time being. Hey, don't eat those. They're made of lies.
Oh, that is so funny. The radioisotope in place is potassium that's in those bananas, by the way.
See? Listen, why do fruit exist? For a delicious, nutritious snack for humans and animals alike to enjoy?
Wow, that's impressive. Into the sun.
No, you didn't have to go throwing him into the sun like that.
You're next, Susan!
How did you know my name? I created you. Anyway, as most of you probably know, fruit are a
Overprotective
thing
dad?
because nature figured out, hey, if you put a little bit of deliciousness around your seed, it'll convince some idiot bird or something to carry your baby off to faraway.
That is so genius. I love the little DNA strand with the face representing evolution. Reminds me of one of Blue Jay's videos where he put little cutesy faces on like a gamma ray or something like that.
Fans, right? But then humans showed up and were like, hey, that's pretty nifty. Listen, is it cool if we selectively breed you for thousands of years to give you horrific deformities to crank up that whole deliciousness part a couple hundred notches? Alright, cool. Let's take a look at bananas, specifically the Cavendish variety that we all know and love. On the inside, we got like 2% seeds, 93% delectable banana meat, and 5% that brown part at the bottom that your mom says is perfectly fine to eat, but you still don't trust.
I don't like that part.
Terrible for reproducing efficiently. Meanwhile, check out the thing on the right here. That's Musa acuminata, one of the suspected ancestors of today's nanners. Much smaller and jam-packed with seeds, with just enough flesh in there to make it worth some smelly primate's time to crack open a yellow one with the boys. Here's another wild type banana, Musa balbesiana. Less sweet, way starchier, harder to get into, hella seeds, same shit different day really. But hey, if you stick that boy in the ground, you've got an okay chance of making a new banana tree. You bury a modern banana, all you're gonna end up with is a dirty banana. And not that one club in Miami, I mean an actual dirty banana. That's because, like a lot of cultivated fruit, culinary bananas are so inbred and malformed that they can't produce offspring even if they wanted to. So, word of advice for you men out there, if ever a lady points out how poorly endowed you are, just show her this JPEG. She'll say, wow, I didn't realize it was so potent and fertile. You really opened my eyes, thank you. Bananas aren't the only piece of produce to follow this pattern though, not by a long shot. For example, take the watermelon. According to Monsanto, everybody's favorite corporation, the first evidence of human cultivation of the watermelon dates back to Egypt around 5,000 years ago.
Wow.
Back then, they were only 2 inches in diameter, around the size of a tennis ball. The flesh was supposedly tough and bitter, much like that of a tennis ball. Of course, just as the growth of a delicious green baby takes time, so too did the evolution of the modern watermelon. In fact, even as late as the mid-1600s, watermelons looked way different from what we have today, as shown by this painting by Giovanni Stanchi. Notice the thicker rind, the larger seeds, and the weird segmentation on the inside.
I had no idea about
a cooler
that.
still life subject, but ultimately inferior as a summertime snack. How about vegetables? Tell me, do you enjoy cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, broccoli, or cauliflower? I mean, I guess I like broccoli and cauliflower. The rest are kind of gross though. Wrong! All 6 of these vegetables are actually the same thing. That means you like them all. That's not how that works. I'll be good.
Anyway, these veggies are all just cultivars of the same species, Brassica oleracea, otherwise known as wild cabbage. Every part of the plant is edible to some extent, but there's not much of it to go around. So a bunch of different people throughout history said, alright, what if we just take one specific part of the plant and go fucking insane with it? And that's what they did. Those who bred for giant leaves got kale, going for huge dense flower buds gets you broccoli, juicy engorged lateral leaf buds equal Brussels sprouts, etc. Speaking of segues, let's
Nuclear energy gets all these things about, hey, about creating horrific mutations with radiation, but so these sort of things existed, but with produce and with just people wanting to make fruit bigger and more tasty rather than this big, nasty, radioactive monster thing. So it's funny how there's precedent for that, though it's got nothing to do with nuclear engineering or radioactive material. This is some very good stuff, and I had no idea about the whole broccoli and kale and cauliflower all basically sharing a common ancestor that they've chopped off and mutated.
check out eggplants. The OG eggplant was first domesticated in India, where it can still be found in the wild today. It looks nothing like an eggplant though. They actually resemble little green berries the size of grapes. The only thing it seems to have in common with the classic purple eggplant is how little both of them have in common with an egg. However, if we add the RGB percentage values of their color and merge their shapes, we do get what looks approximately like an egg. So I guess that
so
solves that
nerdy and
mystery.
genius.
This
I
whole
love it.
transformation really is a testament to man's greatness though. That's like starting out with a frog and selectively breeding them until you end up with Grimace from McDonald's lore. Speaking of which, did you know Grimace used to be evil and have 4 arms? This is a real thing. I'd like to think that when they lopped off his extra limbs, all his evil energy went with him, and now there's just 2 plump purple cylinders scampering around the countryside waiting to pull unsuspecting kids under ball pits, never to be seen again.
I love this recurring joke he has with McDonald's and Sesame Street and all this crazy
Next is
kid
corn,
stuff.
or sorry, maize. I call it corn like a normal person. If it was supposed to be called maize, these would be called mazes. Obviously, that's like the perfect opportunity, but they're not, so put an etymological sock in it.
They should be mazes.
Anyway, I was totally expecting
jokes.
old corn to look like those baby corns you find in Chinese food and literally nowhere else. Turns out those actually are just baby corns. One suspected ancestor of corn is known as Teosinte, which looks like this. Gee whiz, Sam, that sure does look like garbage. Good eye, Billy. That's because it was garbage.
One other interesting thing about produce and other food products is they are often irradiated to sterilize. As one commenter pointed out, I did miss one additional misconception associated with nuclear. And here's another one. It's that irradiated food is radioactive. No, that's not the case. Radiation treatment was done to that. Things like having a source of gamma radiation, X-rays, and I believe also a field of beta particles or electrons were shined on them in order to sterilize certain foods. I'll link an article from the Food and Drug Administration that talks a little bit more about that. But no, they're not radioactive. They're no more radioactive than you are after getting a simple dental X-ray. It doesn't activate the vegetables or anything like that. But this sort of technique is also used for surgical equipment. It's a good way to sterilize things since viruses, bacteria can't withstand that type of radiation. Now, it isn't always done with ionizing radiation. You could do that with UV as well, but the gamma is just an even higher energy, gamma rays and X-rays, than those little UV things that you've probably seen at the peak of COVID going around and sweeping certain rooms and buildings.
As modern corn has a kernel count in the hundreds, Teosinte only has 5 to 12, with each one being encased in a hard shell that's basically impossible to get into short of boiling it or chipping a tooth. The fact that people decided to domesticate it in the first place makes sense once you realize that most grains are basically the same thing, but honestly, that just makes me wish people figured out how to turn a piece of wheat into a big chunk of whatever to gnaw on. This whole thing disappointed me so much that I actually moved it to the top of my list of reasons not
scared that Quetzalcoatl was real. Yeah. What about that whole 2012 being the end of the world thing? I mean, I guess we're past that, but still.
To visit the Mayans if I ever get a time machine. Nonetheless, as you can see, human endeavor can accomplish amazing things. And just as a few thousand years of selective breeding can turn this into this, a few hours of learning a week can turn you into, a more talented and interesting version of you. Anyway, till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
Wow, that was fascinating. I didn't know much about those, how different a lot of produce was. I'm glad to have found a channel like Salmonella's to, one, debunk a lot of my own misconceptions I had about things, and two, just enhance my knowledge and give me the opportunity to share some more knowledge too. I've really enjoyed watching his videos. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella's videos called Animals in Space, A Brief History. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, animal test subjects have always been an important facet of science, since they allow us to study physiology in more destructive ways than we could get away with on humans.
Wow.
So it should come as no surprise that, over the years, there's been a lot of creatures haphazardly thrown at the cosmos against their will. Here's a bunch of smelly animals that achieve more in their short lives than you ever will. Quick disclaimer, this is by no means a comprehensive list, not even close, we'd be here all day if it was. More so just a highlight reel of the ones I found the most interesting. So the Great Zoo in the Sky was first founded in 1947 when the US launched a craft containing a bunch of fruit flies 68 miles into the air in order to see
I had no idea it was that early.
mutants would get made from all the cosmic radiation.
So, obviously he's making a joke about bizarre mutations, but the radiation in space is significant and varies a lot. According to NASA, it is between 50 and 2,000 millisieverts, which is basically like getting between 150 and 6,000 chest x-rays for going up into space. A part of it depends on solar activity and how long you actually do it. It's directly proportional to your stay time in space. But that is a lot. Nuclear engineers and other radiation workers, the annual dose limit is 50 millisieverts. So they're getting a lot more dose than we were supposed to get working at a nuclear power plant. And keep in mind, I never got that much, and even people who had to go towards some of the hottest jobs, I don't know anyone who got anywhere near 50 millisieverts. So astronauts, I'm sorry, but that same requirement must not apply to you guys. So yeah, the dose is crazy. One of the things we take for granted is an atmosphere, strong magnetic fields to protect us from cosmic radiation. They're even saying that a civilization looking to have life on Mars, if we were to do that, we're going to want to start underground just because of the additional shielding to protect us from radiation, since Mars doesn't have much of an atmosphere or magnetic field. Let's continue.
Unfortunately, they were totally fine, so the Earth was like, hey, living things can go into space and not die instantly, supple. And the next year, they decided to send up a rhesus macaque named Albert, which it seems kind of like jumping the gun to go from barely alive specks to basically a person in one step. If it were me, I would have thrown like a frog or a gerbil in between there, but whatever, I'm no cosmopolitan. Anyway,
What is that thing?
suffocation on the way up and never really made it to space alive. Fun fact, this rocket was actually a V-2 missile stolen
That's what
from
it
the
looked
Germans
like.
too.
Huh.
So just in case any of you have any sympathy for those Nazi characters, they're technically responsible for the death of a poor innocent space monkey.
Another reason to not like the Nazis.
But I guess the US felt pretty bad about it, so they decided to deal with their grief by naming the next monkey Albert II. Pretty unhealthy coping mechanism according to my shrink, but she also thinks Punk is dead, so what does she know? This Albert actually made it into space alive through a grand effort incorporating all the incredible cutting-edge technology that the atomic era had to offer. And after all that, they goofed on the parachute, so Albert II turned into a fine red mist on impact, which just goes to prove the age-old adage, you can lead a monkey to space, but you can't make him land. There were a few more Alberts after this. Albert III fucking exploded.
Wow.
Albert IV made it up, but he had another tissue paper parachute what don't work for heck, so he's out. Albert V, yet again, bad chute, liquefied on impact, until finally, in 1951, on Albert number 6, they figured out how to make a big blanket that consistently makes you not immediately die when you fall from the sky. And the monkey was recovered alive from the capsule, alongside his 11 mouse roommates.
course, he died 2 hours later, but hey, still counts. Earlier that same
Wow.
year, Russia launched 2 little pupniks named Tsigan and Dzik, both of whom came back unharmed. These 2 were the first vertebrates to ever leave Earth and come back alive. Then in 57, the Reds snagged another achievement by putting the first living thing into orbit, besides the bacteria clinging to Sputnik 1, but they're losers, we don't talk about them. Specifically, they launched one brave and daring dog from the streets of Moscow, probably the most famous animal to ever go into space. You know its name well. That dog is, of course, Airbud. The other guys we talked about, Laika was never planned to be recovered intact since we barely knew how to put something into orbit by this time, let alone bring it back. But they still wanted to make sure she stayed alive long enough to at least reach space. So before the mission, they put her through the most rigorous canine space camp that Russia had to offer, throwing her in a centrifuge for a while to get her used to G-force, making her cage progressively smaller to get her used to cramped spaces, which made her just not shit anymore at all, but that's a different story. They also switched her diet to a special high nutrition gel that she would have eaten after takeoff, you know, had her brain not crapped out from overheating within the first few hours. In 59, the US strapped 2 monkeys to the nose cone of a Jupiter missile and actually got them back alive afterwards, which is crazy mostly because these things withstood 38 Gs of acceleration. For context, that's the force that makes even trained pilots lose consciousness times 4, or this thing times 12, or roughly the same forced experience when you realize that's not a normal speed bump, but one of those evil tiny ones that ruin your life. You know the ones. Well, that's what you get for doing 25 near a hospital, Sam. Well, hey, good thing I'm already here considering the ballistics test that just went down between the roof of my car and my frickin' skull. Jesus. So in 61, we graduated from monkeys to great apes, sending up a chimpanzee named Ham. Remember Space Chimps? Yeah, it was that. Frame for frame, Andy Samberg and all. What's special about Ham is that he was actually trained to pull levers and slap buttons while up in the ship, being rewarded banana pellets for completing tasks and getting his feet tased whenever he messed up.
And that is proof right there that a monkey can operate a nuclear power plant. Not really, but sure.
A cartoon, I know, but I promise it's for real. Meanwhile, the Soviets were busy putting a big, bald, smart ape into orbit. No big deal.
Smart
France
ape.
saw the US and Russia sending up monkeys and dogs and felt left out, so in 63, they launched a cat.
Of course, he's got a beret.
Yeah, that's cool and unique. I'm one of the popular kids now. In 68, the Soviets saw the rabbit making rice cakes on the moon and said, how about a tortoise for that hare, launching 2 of them into deep space, all the way around the moon and back to Earth, where they were recovered alive after their capsule landed in the ocean. Kinda cheating when you are your own crash suit, but an impressive feat regardless. In 73, we put mummy chogs in space. What's a mummy chog? It's one of these things. Like a fish, but real rough and tumble. Tolerates low oxygen, weird...
I never knew about fish.
Dishwasher safe, Energy Star rated, you name it, sister.
Wow.
At first they could only swim in circles, but after a couple weeks, they actually adapted to 0G and figured out how to maneuver properly. Even more interesting, we also brought mummy chog eggs. And when these hatched, the little mummy choglets knew how to swim in 0G immediately. Kinda spooky.
Spaceborne aliens.
Sent up some spiders who managed to spin some webs. Trash webs, mind you, but hey, they managed. In 78, The Muppet Show aired Pigs in Space for the first time. In 85, we cut off the arms of a bunch of newts and set them up to see if they grow back the same way. The reasoning behind this being, if a newt can't grow stuff back, then an astronaut with a paper cut probably can't either. Fortunately, they rearmed themselves at the normal rate, so all's good on that front.
You wonder about those creatures now. Granted, creatures that small are going to be less affected by gravity, but like people that are born in space, well, first off, can people even have kids in space? And we like for them to come to Earth if they're used to that 0G environment. They're going to have to wear an Earth suit.
At the same time,
oh, that is terrifying.
Sesame Street about sending Big Bird up on the space shuttle as a publicity stunt. This is real.
It's hard to look at.
Ultimately fell through after they realized Big Bird is fucking giant and unwieldy at all times. Literally the worst possible choice for a celebrity cameo on a space shuttle. So instead they sent a school teacher in his place. And then the Challenger fucking exploded. Let me reiterate. There is a timeline not too far from this one where Big Bird is a casualty in the single worst astronautical disaster in history. A tiny
that's wild.
Almost wishes that happened. Like, that's just so indescribably absurd. In the early 90s, we set up some baby jellyfish to grow up in space just for laughs. They figured out how to maneuver just fine, but when we brought them back down, they literally didn't have a concept of gravity and couldn't orient themselves properly in their new environment.
I guess that's the point right there. So we did that experiment with jellyfish. Yeah, that would be hard. Gotta get those Earth suits if we're gonna have kids in space.
Being a jellyfish is the easiest thing there is. You just kind of exist, maybe squirm a little now and then. So when you manage to somehow mess that up, you know things have gone seriously wrong.
Yeah.
In 2003, the US sent up a bunch of
2003?
including silkworms, spiders, carpenter bees, and harvester ants. Whoops, they exploded.
Yeah.
In 07, some tardigrades went up,
Columbia.
totally exposed to the vacuum of space for 10 days, which, surprise, surprise, they were fine. On that same mission, a cockroach gave birth, creating the first organism that we know of to ever have been conceived outside of Earth.
Conceived,
And
too.
finally, in
Interesting.
2018, Elon Musk sent a big basket of mice to the International Space Station. Just, you know, 'cause he can. So those are just a handful of God's
Elon
creatures
Musk.
who got to experience the majesty of not knowing up from down. If you're like me, you're probably a little jealous. Why does an ugly ant get to go into space, but I don't? I wish to bear witness to the music of the spheres firsthand in a way that a lower creature could never appreciate.
That's a
You know
trip.
why you feel like that? Because you're a nerd. And what
I am a
better way
nerd. I love Salmonello's stuff. I always learn these really obscure things. That's like his thing. Never knew about the fish or cockroaches or that jellyfish experiment. I guess that just went ahead and answered my question. That's awesome. Today we're going to be looking at another one of Salmonella's videos called An Open Letter to Swiss Miss. This one was also recommended to me, and there's this odd form of a case study about poor engineering in a packaging of hot chocolate. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, let me tell you about Swiss Miss Instant Hot Chocolate and why their packaging is bullshit. So it comes in a box shaped like this, right? And within the box there are individual bags of hot chocolate arranged like this. Already you can see some of this company's incompetence shining through. There is no reason for their box to be double wide. It is a waste of cardboard. Let me prove it. Here's a top-down view, right? Let's say this side is 8 inches, this side is 2 inches. That adds up to 20 inches of cardboard. If you doubled it up like this, just had the package a single file, that's only 16 inches. It's a waste. And if that weren't bad enough,
That's
for
true.
some reason, they decide to attach the bags with these tiny paper bridges. So when you go to make your packet of hot chocolate, you have to detach the two bags. That doesn't sound so bad, except for the fact that it's impossible to break them cleanly. Every goddamn time, they tear holes into the sides of the bags. And it's never just one bag either. That would be too simple. It puts holes in both. So either way, you're gonna have to put one back and just live with it leaking powder in the box. It's gotten to the point where I have to employ surgical precision just to avoid getting chocolate dust all over my frickin' house. It would be so simple to avoid too. Even if you really had to have these pointless attachment things, you could at least put little perforations down the center so they break down the middle. School notebooks have been doing it since the 50s, so why, in 2016, has Swiss Miss not discovered the arcane technology of dotted lines?
It is just so fascinating how simple packaging ergonomics can have such an impact on your day, how things are done, just your general frustration level. This, a simple layout, orientation, that was not the root cause, but one of the contributors to the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. Part of it was the control rooms were all cluttered and everything. You had a bunch of equipment out of service tags were large and bulky to the point where they'd cover up some indications. So the operators couldn't see as well what was actually going on in the core. So yeah, this poor layout, poor design for something as trivial as this can absolutely ruin your day. I 100% agree with them on this.
So there's powder everywhere. The cat's looking at you funny because it knows you're pissed off, but at least it's time to enjoy some hot chocolate. You pour your bag into the mug, pour in the hot water, take a sip, and it tastes like piss. Swiss Miss Instant Piss. So you go back to check the box, thinking maybe you did something wrong. The cat starts shaking because it knows what's coming, and that's when you see it. Serving size, 6 ounces.
No.
So finally the dam breaks. You unleash a primal roar of sheer fury. The cat shits itself and jumps out the window as you punt kick the Swiss Miss box across the room. The average mug is 12 fluid ounces in.
This reminds me of the time they got the units wrong for the Martian lander and ended up completely destroying it between metric and English units. This sort of thing also happened a while ago before they built the nuclear power plants in Georgia, that they got the conversion wrong between There's like 2 different types of pints, and they're off by, I want to say, 25%. And these safety-related accumulators were off by 25% too small. So yeah, that was they had to do it all over again. And these things can lead to construction delays. And again, it's an error-likely situation too, for when you have something that everyone's used to a standard size being 12 ounces and it being half the size. That really is unacceptable. And yeah, he has every right to tear into these people.
Volume. Who in God's name only drinks 6 ounces of liquid?
It's not a cup
finally,
size
you
either.
reach into the box and pull out the desecrated corpse of that other bag from earlier, and you pour it in. Only then can you enjoy your subpar hot beverage properly. This whole system, right? This charade that Swiss Miss puts you through. It's kind of like telling a guy to just jizz with one ball instead of both of them. They're in the same container, and separating them would be difficult. And even if I were to figure out how to do that, 2 does the job better than 1 anyway, so it's pointless. Nowadays, I just fold the packet in half and rip along the seams of both. And maybe that was their intention, but if so, why would you give me the illusion of separability in the first place?
Yeah.
It's like Siamese twins. They're joined for no reason and hard as fuck to separate, so I guess I'm just gonna have to live with both. I don't know which is worse, the fact this minor inconvenience was my biggest dilemma all day, or that this inconvenience even exists in the first place. But anyway, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
It's hilarious. I mean, yeah, he probably made this after just having one too many bad days associated with that hot chocolate, but these little things add up. I mean, I know in various continuous improvement type projects, you look for these low-level things because of how much stress they cause your personnel and like going back to nuclear, your reactor operators. Those are people you do not want stressed because they are people you count on to do their job effectively when things go south. Not that things go south often, but we are dependent on having these highly trained individuals. And I bet you never thought I would relate Swiss Miss to nuclear power, but there's a connection. Today we're going to be looking at a very heavily requested Sam O'Neill Academy video called Timothy Dexter, the dumbest rags to riches story. I'm not sure why this one is so heavily recommended, but let's find out.
Hey kids, now we all know that fate is a fickle thing. Some of us may try to defy its will, but there's enough small businesses with Pizza Hut roofs out there to tell you.
Is that one a church? Wow. That's crazy.
That such a thing is ultimately futile. As for most of us, we tend to have our fair share of good and bad luck throughout our lives, but every now and then, RN Jesus smiles upon some drooling little loaf child and says, "You, my son, you shall be the one with all the figgy pudding." That child was Timothy Dexter. Dexter was born in Malden, Massachusetts in 1747. He had a humble upbringing, dropping out of school as an 8-year-old to work as a farmhand and a leather worker, but Dexter thought he deserved better, so when he grew up, he married one Elizabeth Frothingham, a rich widow in need of company. Gold digging achieved, he began his quest to become a true aristocrat. As his first step, he thinks, all the rich guys I know are in positions of power. I should run for office. Now, the town of Malden wasn't much keen on appointing a bumbling second-grade dropout, but after rejecting dozens of petitions sent in by Dexter, they eventually gave up and decided to just make some shit up, leading to Dexter becoming the official informer of deer, tasking him with keeping logs of the local deer population. And over statistics of does and bucks alike, Dexter ruled with an iron fist, triumphantly concluding what many had already known.
What's interesting is nuclear power plants, because they're so safe and secluded, a lot of times are on wildlife refuge. And what's interesting is there are cases where there's wildlife refuge, it can be right next to somebody's deer lease, and then they go out hunting, shoot the deer, and the deer is like right on the border between the deer lease and the property of the plant, which is a nature preserve. And if it falls there, or I guess it's more common with birds as well, but if it falls on the property of the plant, the nuclear plant actually has to pay the fine. Crazy.
that there weren't any deer in Malden, Massachusetts. Satisfied with his political career, Dexter then set his sights on greater financial ventures. So a little history. In 1775,
Oh, that that British Isle and the little 13 colonies stick together like some type of Frankenstein monster is so funny. That's awesome.
Part of our growing independence from Britain, the Continental Congress decided to establish their own currency,
boy.
known as the Continental Dollar. Real creative there. Then the Revolutionary War started, and it dawned on people that these pieces of paper wouldn't be very useful in a giant pile of wet tea and smoldering patriots, causing their value to do one of those horny eagle death spirals. Then the Congress did, you know, that stupid thing that every high schooler learns is stupid, not invading Russia in winter, but the other one, practically making them worth less than their weight in paper and ink. And wouldn't you know it, a good portion of the Continental Army was paid with these.
no.
So by the time the war ended, many veterans were left totally destitute. The aristocrats were like, well, these grass-eating Untermensches did kind of give us a country, so whatever, we'll throw them a few cents and take this trash off their hands. Dexter was like, ooh, I'm a wealthman. I'm gonna do that too. And he spent the majority of his savings buying a boatload after boatload of the 1780s equivalent of Blockbuster gift cards. By all accounts, this should have been his ruin, but by some stroke of luck, after the Constitution was ratified, the new government decided that they'd trade Continentals for treasury bonds.
Those are so goofy looking Continental box fur. Yes. This looks historically accurate. I love it. Is this why this was so heavily recommended? I have a feeling it might be.
Worth 1% of their face value. Doesn't sound like much, but keep in mind, Dexter bought thousands of crates of bills for fractions of pennies apiece. So as buybacks began across the country, his stockpile appreciated massively in value.
Wow.
And this informer of deer realized that, for the first time, there were a lot of bucks in Malden. But just because he was now a man of the upper crust doesn't mean he let it go to his head. Sure, he might have purchased the most luxurious chateau that money could buy, through daily Playboy Mansion-style ragers, and commissioned over 40 statues of America's greatest heroes, one of which was of himself, with a plaque calling him, quote, the greatest philosopher in the Western world.
Wow.
Despite his incredibly tacky displays of wealth, his contemptuous contemporaries still saw him for the loud, illiterate rube he was. So they started giving him deliberately awful investment tips in order to get him to bankrupt himself. One such
If he existed now, I would whisper in his ear to tell him to invest in nuclear power. Not that it's an awful investment tip. It is a great investment tip, especially small modular reactors, where we can have them in smaller communities, in addition to powering large cities, where you can build them all in a factory. And you can even repower old coal and natural gas plants, just replace the heat source with these small modular reactors. I mean, yeah, extensive testing has to be involved, but it is considerably less expensive than building a full-size nuclear power plant from scratch. And you'll realize economies of scale by continuing to build more of these. We'll learn how to build them more efficiently too. And man, that would be so cool. Nuclear would become modular just like renewables, except with all the additional advantages that nuclear brings, like baseload power, simply more megawatts, and less dangerous maintenance. You don't have to worry about people falling off wind turbines.
Of advice was that he should ship warming pans to the Caribbean. For those of you born after 1850,
build a nuclear reactor in the Caribbean.
This dish on a long pole that you fill up with hot coals to warm up your bed. Not much use in a tropical paradise. But Dexter was undeterred by such frivolous things as logic. Went ahead and sent over 40,000 of them to the West Indies. When they arrived, the locals didn't really know what they were looking at and decided to use them as ladles for the sugar and molasses refineries. And by the end of it, Dexter sold every single one at a markup of nearly 80%. Frustrated that their plan backfired, 80%. The elites then told him to literally carry coal to Newcastle, which is an old idiom used to describe a pointless task, based off the fact that Newcastle was one of the world's biggest producers.
I've never heard of that one.
The
That's
only
a cool
idioms
expression.
Dexter knew about all involved different animals shitting in the woods, so he took their word on good faith and went along with it. But by some divine providence, by the time the shipment arrived, the Newcastle coal miners had all gone on strike, and Dexter once again cleared the entire shipment with a hefty profit. He was like, man, I am so smart. By this point, he was pretty confident in his speculation skills, so he started making seemingly far-fetched ventures all by himself. One time he had a bunch of stray cats rounded up for basically free, which sounds like herding cats, but what do I know? And he sent them to the Caribbean, where they were gobbled up en masse. Not like eaten, but purchased to deal with all the
So
rat
eat the cats?
infestations. In another instance, he bought up just about every whalebone in Boston. And coincidentally, at the same time in France, men started wearing corsets too for some reason. Demand went way up, Dexter's laughing. Now, from an outside perspective, at the end of the day, Dexter was a very shrewd merchant. So at this point in my research, I was like, wait a minute, is he smart? Then I learned about his life outside of business. Dexter considered himself extremely knowledgeable on just about every topic. Keywords, considered himself. For example, he once stumbled upon a guy painting a sign to go along with the newly built statue of Jefferson. And when he saw that the sign called Jefferson the writer of the Declaration of Independence, Dexter lost his frickin' mind and insisted that Jefferson did not pen the DOI, but rather the Constitution. Spoiler alert, not remotely true. He was in France at the time. An easy mistake to make today, sure, but this was only like 10 years after the fact. That's someone today saying, Obama didn't kill Bin Laden, dumbass. That was Bill Clinton. Anyway, when the painter refused to change the inscription, Dexter started shooting at him with a long rifle until he complied. Real genteel. Dexter made sure to surround himself with the requisite number of weirdos to maintain this level of delusion, one of which was Jonathan Plummer, a man whom Dexter paid to be his poet laureate, writing only the most laudatory odes.
Quality poet laureate right there.
Honor. Mind you, this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill wise and wizened wordsmith. Jonathan sold fish for a living. And porn. He just kind of went along with the whole thing for the pocket change. Besides,
the idea of this self-proclaimed genius and self-proclaimed knowledge person reminds me of something that happened after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So being in nuclear power, we actually studied the spill a bit because we like to learn things from other industrial accidents, including ones that aren't just nuclear related. Because to be fair, nuclear accidents don't happen nearly as often as accidents do in other industries. So in studying this, we happened upon the Hutchinson-Lazarian frequency generator. I'll put a link in the description on this, but this was developed by another set of self-proclaimed geniuses that managed to find some magic frequency to heal the earth and clean up the oil. This is back when it was gushing out of the well. And yeah, it's just so bizarre. It kind of reminds me of like the life stream from Final Fantasy VII, except except for oil. I mean, I don't know where people come up with these sort of things, but I'm not a self-proclaimed genius, so I wouldn't know, I guess.
Entourage, Dexter occasionally spent time with the total geeds known as his family. He had 2 children, whom the New England Historical Society describes as a half-mad drunk and a completely mad drunk, respectively. And he couldn't stand his wife on account of her perceived constant nagging, to the point where he would tell guests he was unmarried and that he just had a ghost in his house. Just like, oh yeah, that's a sea hag. You know, mansion built on some old Indian shipwreck or something. Timmy, please, I'm cold and my hands are rheumatic. Find it in your heart to light the fireplace for me? Yeah, plenty of that in hell, you banshee bitch. One day, in a massive stroke of ego, Dexter decided to fake his own death, complete with a lavish funeral service just to see who would show up. Lucky for him, about 3,000 people from all walks of life turned up. Though initially staying out of sight, he soon noticed that his wife wasn't crying. So in response, he jumped out and started hitting her upside the head with a cane in front of everybody. But as his true mortality grew closer, Dexter knew he needed a legacy and decided to pen his memoirs, titled A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, which was basically just 20 pages of unhinged ranting about politics, religion, his wife, and whatever else came to mind. No punctuation, random capitalization, the most amazing spelling I've ever seen. Here's some excerpts. George Washington, attitude, philosopher, tobacco, general. And this is all just from the first few lines. The entire book is written like this. And just like everything else the guy did, the thing sold like fucking hotcakes. Why does anybody even try? The best part is that when he got complaints about the total lack of grammatical anything, in the second edition of the book, he put an extra page at the end full of nothing but punctuation marks with a little note saying that anyone who felt like
talk about your malicious compliance.
Dexter died in 1806, and by and large, he probably should have ended up in Davy Jones's locker.
What a way to go out.
Given the circumstances, I imagine the big man upstairs dropped his big deck of mortal soul trading cards at just the right moment, letting him slip through the pearly gates undetected. And legend has it that to this day, if you pray to the name Timothy Dexter, he'll look upon you kindly and share his skills with you all. Till next time, I'm Sam Manelli.
Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
This was probably one of my favorite one of Salmonella's videos. It was just so crazy. I mean, can you imagine being that lucky and that unhinged as far as investments? And you know what? I take that back about this guy investing in nuclear power. That's probably not for the best, considering how crazy he was. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella's videos called World War II's Unluckiest Ship. Now this one was requested, and again, I greatly appreciate all of these hilarious requests. I've enjoyed watching a lot of Salmonella's videos already. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, now some philosophers have called boats the airplanes of the sea, but while every glamorous Glennis has its slow-mo shun, so too does JJ the jet plane have his awful counterpart. Her legacy in many ways resembles my middle school career, a 3-year-long travesty plagued by blunder after blunder due to both gross incompetence and sheer misfortune, with the only silver lining being that it's remembered by relatively few. Meet the USS William D. Porter, nicknamed the Willie D, which was a perfectly acceptable alias in the days before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She was a Fletcher-class destroyer, which, if you know Fletcher as well as I do, you know he's pretty high-class at destroying. Like when he snapped off my DS screen during summer camp because he was trying to get a better look. Didn't even apologize. He was just like, well, you're not supposed to bring video games to camp anyway. Even though everyone did. Fuck you, Fletcher. You were a counselor. You're supposed to be more mature than us. You're the reason I grew up with a lingering resentment towards authority. And my only reprisal is that I got to draw you as a disgusting fat lard for millions of people.
Self-insert here.
Actually, I think his name might have been Eric. Anyway, in July of 1943, the ship was commissioned by the Navy and led by Lieutenant Commander Wilfred A. Walter. As her first real job, the Willie D was assigned to a top-secret escort mission across the Atlantic. Walter was like, alright man, time to prove ourselves. I want to see you all on your A-game. And as its first act under military command, the ship didn't raise anchor properly and tore a massive chunk out of the ship next to it while pulling out. Okay, rough start, but definitely not a sign of things to come. The next day, she met up with 3 other ships, including 2 destroyers and a battleship known as the USS Iowa, and the fleet set off towards Africa. Given the clandestine nature of the operation,
They were ordered to maintain total radio silence.
so as not to alert any subs that might be lurking below. Suddenly, boom, bang, borf, Hare Krishna, huge explosion off the starboard quarter. They're like, holy shit, evasive maneuvers. But after however many minutes, the transmission comes in saying, hi, this is Wilfred D. of the Willie Walter. So a depth charge may have accidentally fallen off the ship, and we may have also forgotten to turn off the safety mechanisms on said charge, causing it to detonate immediately. So if you heard a little noise a bit ago, no cause for alarm.
So if this were to happen in the nuclear industry, that is what's known as a plant status control event. When something in one configuration, whether it be to human error or a procedural flaw that, have, like a depth charge going off or a valve being closed when it should be open. And there is a whole oversight committee and investigation team and error prevention tools, in addition to engineering controls, put in place to prevent these sort of things from happening. This type of event was a contributing cause in the 3 Mile Island accident. The valves that supplied emergency feed water to the steam generators in 3 Mile Island were inadvertently left closed following a special test. So when the event happened in the primary system of a relief valve sticking open, causing a loss of pressure in the primary, one thing that could have prevented the 3 Mile Island accident was an adequate heat sink. But the steam generators had already boiled dry completely for several minutes before the operators even knew what was going on, because those valves are supposed to be open. They assumed they were open, but they weren't. And that's why you have those sort of additional oversight. And yeah, the Navy would benefit from something like that too. And I think the modern Navy does, but I don't know. Definitely the nuclear Navy does, but not sure about the World War II era Navy, if they had a whole program designed to preventing these type of events.
Sorry for breaking radio silence. Love you. Bye. Shortly thereafter, a strange phenomenon was spotted near the ship. Officer, what in the rhyme of the ancient fuck is that? Appears to be a large wave, sir. Jesus Christ, they have that now? Basically everything that wasn't tied down ended up being swept off, and one of the boilers in the engine room got foobarred. But fortunately, no crew members were taken away, except for the one that was. Later, the 4 ships congregated in the waters east of Bermuda when the Iowa decided to test its anti-air abilities and launched a bunch of weather balloons for target practice. A few of these drifted towards the Willie D, and they took some potshots just for fun, probably wrecking some happy albatross households in the process. But Walter was like, men, it's time to redeem ourselves. Spit those crayons out. Don't you know the purple ones are bad for you? Time for some impromptu torpedo drills on the Iowa. Yay! That was Narnar and the Pow Pow. They're gonna douse their trousers when they see how good we tore those pedos. Say, you guys remember to take the primer out of all of them before launching, right? Yes, sir. Yep. What? Fortunately, the Iowa didn't really have much valuable cargo that could be damaged in the event that the torpedo struck. Oh, except for 32nd President of the United States Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was being escorted to Cairo as the whole point of the mission. The next 5 minutes aboard the Willie D were just total fucking chaos. Humid sacks of rice, hogs and bats sniffing each other, massive stereos. Commander, we really should radio them. No! I am not breaking any more rules! Do the flashy light thing! Hey, incoming signal from old Iron Brains, a yuck. They're saying they're, going to reverse at full speed? What? Shit off a bowsprit, this ain't working! Fine, call him! FaceTime, oovo, I don't give a hoot! The transmission arrived in the nick of time, and the torpedo detonated a safe distance away in the Iowa's wake. Of course, that didn't stop the entire crew of the Willie D from being arrested for, shooting a torpedo at the president. Lawton Dawson, the Elmer's eater from earlier, was initially sentenced to 14 years hard labor, till FDR came out and was like, no, it's okay. Boys will be boys. But we are sending you and the rest of Carnival Cruise Line to Alaska, where there's fewer things to ruin by being yourself. Get it, Carnival Cruise Line? Because you're the worst. And also clowns. So they kicked it for a while in the Aleutians, otherwise known as the Tale of the Pregnant Rat that makes up Alaska. This went on mostly without incident.
It does a lot of terrifying images on this.
When they were anchored outside an officer's home during a New Year's Eve party, and a sailor got drunk and decided to fire off one of the 5-inch guns for a laugh, and ended up sending a bunch of his geranium straight to hell where they belong. Other than that, smooth sailing. Then they hung out at the Philippines for a bit before Central Command was like, alright, looks like you smoothskins are ready for actual missions again. Except you're going to clown college. And the Willie D was sent to the Battle of Okinawa under the leadership of some guy named Charles. Here they actually did some worthwhile stuff until June 10th, 1945, when a kamikaze began to dive towards them. They weren't able to shoot it down, probably because it wasn't American, but it crashed in the water some ways away.
Wow.
They were like, phew, crisis averted. Turned their attention elsewhere, unintentionally driving right over where the bomber landed.
Oh,
the plane was like, the hell? Oh, shit, that's right. Bonsai. About 3 hours of desperate repairs went by before the order to abandon ship was given, and miraculously, every crew member made it out alive by the time the ship sank, just 12 minutes later. So it just goes to show everything has its silver lining. Everyone on the dipship gets to live, every filthy Chuck E. Cheese ball pit has a delicious prize at the bottom, and the vast nexus of pointless diversions we call the internet actually has a couple productive things to do on it too. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and I'm a fella with rubella.
That's crazy. Yeah, can't think of a power plant that's had that kind of bad luck, but some of that seems like it was preventable, but other bits of that it's this combination of errors in procedure, and I guess the closest thing, if you compare, whoever's driving the ship to like the reactor operators going over the bomber. Wow, glad. It's nothing short of a miracle that they all survived, though. That's incredible. Today we're going to be looking at another episode of the hilarious Sam O'Nella Academy, looking at pre-industrial surgeries. Oh boy.
Hey kids, had a bad day? Well, could be worse. You could be living in a world without modern anesthetic. No. Today, we'll be talking about some surgical procedures carried out long before the development of medicine as we know it today.
It's not just the anesthesia stuff. A lot of the older surgeries had to be conducted without the aid of modern imaging equipment, a lot of which uses radioisotopes and nuclear physics at work. So no CT scans, no PET scans, or even ultrasound. So not only were these surgeries questionable, they didn't always know where they should make the incision. So there there was more guesswork back then, so a lot less precision involved, even without the anesthesia. So.
Now, once you go back a certain distance, the line between operation and mutilation is pretty thin.
Yeah.
So, for our purposes, surgery refers to any bodily manipulation carried out with the intent of fixing some injury or illness. And away we go. The very first surgery that we have historical evidence for dates as far back as 6500 BC.
Wow.
It's called trepanning, which is a nice word for carving someone's frickin' skull open using nothing but a rock.
I've never
Maybe a
heard
rock
of
on a
this.
stick if you were lucky. In all seriousness, though, you can see that a good deal of care went into the procedure, which
That's
lets us know that this
precise.
isn't just the result of random injury. Many skulls even showed signs of healing around the holes, meaning plenty of the people who underwent this whole thing just got up and went about their day afterwards. Alright, hold on, you say. This all sounds guano insane. No way this was that common of an occurrence. Well, friend, if you've been watching this channel long enough, you should know that if you give human beings the benefit of the doubt, chances are they'll prove you wrong. In fact, so far, over 1,500 trepanned skulls have been dug up all across the globe, from Europe to China and even the Americas. This means that between 5 and 10% of all skulls that we've found from the Neolithic period have had at least one
I had
man-made
no
hole
idea. That
scraped
is
into them. To
fascinating.
put it this way, based on that data, there's a greater probability of someone born in the late Stone Age having their brain matter exposed by some shaman with a chunk of flint than someone born in the USA being a redhead. To this day, nobody really knows why this was such a common practice, but most theories tend to revolve around the idea of releasing some kind of dark supernatural force from the patient. Man, I'm getting real sick of all these evil entities infecting our minds and bodies. You can say that again. I tell you, I need these demons like I need a hole in the head. No way. Fast forward to
Oh, that is so good. But did you realize that nuclear reactors are even older than 6500 BC? And I'm not just talking about the sun using nuclear fusion. I'm talking about nuclear fission here on Earth. At the Oklo region near Gabon, there was evidence, geological evidence, that there was a natural nuclear reactor over 1.7 billion years ago. Here's what it looks like today. It was a seam of uranium ore wedged in between sandstone that nuclear reactions occurred along this line. What would happen is the groundwater would mix in with the ore layer, and there was just enough uranium in such a configuration that it could start up. It could go critical and start a nuclear reaction, because water, including groundwater, acts as a moderator that slows down the neutrons to the point where they can fission a uranium-235. Now, uranium-235 only exists in trace amounts naturally, but there was enough in this particular layer to do so. And it would generate heat, it would boil away the groundwater, and in this case, just like a modern pressurized water reactor, it has a negative void coefficient. So increase the voids by boiling the water away, the reactor shuts itself down, and it restarts when the next layer of groundwater comes in through natural geologic processes. I like that it says multiple zones, because it would just start up and shut down over natural fuel cycles across the millennia. It's fascinating that this sort of thing could occur naturally. I would have lost that bet before hearing about this and saying nuclear reactors predated cavemen doing surgery in 6500 BC.
600 BC. Over in India, there lived a guy called Maharshi Susruta. Now, this guy was a medical
What is this? All right, Medical Mastermind House episodes. Why asparagus makes you pee. How to move out now without your finger. Oh, these are great. All the true medical mysteries.
mastermind. He wrote a treatise known as Susruta Samhita, which described countless different conditions, treatments, and yes, even surgeries, one of which is the first recorded instance of rhinoplasty. That means nose job. A hornbill's a type of bird. I'm here too. Anyway, here's how it's done according to Susruta. First, you get them plastered, obviously. Second, you use a leaf to measure out the part of the nose you want fixed. Then, you use the leaf to cut off a flap of skin from the cheek or forehead of the patient.
Yeah.
This part's important though.
No standard
You gotta
size
remember to leave
leaves.
a little piece of it still attached. Otherwise, you just got a chunk of dirty dead face meat on your hands. Now, wherever you're looking to stick the new flesh on, you rub that part raw with a knife. Also, you're gonna want to stick 2 plant stalks in their nostrils so their nose keeps its proper shape. Slap the skin on, suture it, dust it with licorice powder for some reason, and cover it with cotton. Sesame oil should be regularly
I had no
applied
idea
until the skin is
rhinoplasty was a
fully
soul.
healed. If you're like me, I already do that by default, so it shouldn't be an issue. Finally, at long last, your sniffer is reborn. Don't worry, you still look like a freak. Just slightly less so. Moving on, our
Wow.
next surgery took place in 10th century Spain on Sancho I of Leon, otherwise known as Sancho the Fat. Now, normally back in the day, having some meat on your bones was a sign of wealth and power and all that, but this guy was like TLC documentary tier, to the point where he could hardly function as a human being. So his constituents said, "Greetings, your thickness. Yeah, you can't be king anymore on account of you keep breaking every horse we give you, and nobody wants to wash between your accordion
That's
like
rare
neck
that someone
folds
back
no
then
more."
could be that
After his
overweight.
adipose got him deposed, Sancho decided to seek medical help for his condition under the oversight of well-reputed physician Hasdai ibn Shaprut, which is an anagram for paintbrush AIDS.
I love these connections. That's amazing.
Now, if there's one thing that medieval man understood, it's practicality. Lap band, gastric bypass, belly balloon, these all exist to help people who don't have the self-control to stop eating so much on their own. But Dr. Chapadou didn't believe in beating around the bush. He said, well, why don't we just stop the patient from shoving food into his own greasy maw in the first place? And decided to just up and stitch the dude's lips together. After the
Wow.
operation, the only nutrients that Sancho received came through a straw, in the form of a mixture known as Thorium, which was a complex blend of several herbs, fruits, and seeds, including opium. It was basically the closest thing you could find to lean at the time.
Wow, that's you know what? As an engineer, just treat the problem right at the source. I mean, granted, he's creating a few other problems, but you know what? It makes sense. It holds up as using the engineering mindset. It's also a reason why a lot of engineers aren't doctors. A few reasons.
Lean he became, losing around half his weight before ascending to the throne once more. So this is the part of the video where I pander to the desires of the audience. If there's one thing I know you internet people can't get enough of, it's things going inside people's eyeballs. Let's talk about cataract surgery. The art of dealing with people's clouded lenses has been around for millennia, believe it or not.
That one I actually knew, even from ancient Rome, just using a knife really quickly, which is kind of similar to modern cataract surgery, except obviously it vibrates a lot faster using machines now.
Susruta guy from earlier actually talked about the most common procedure for cataracts for most of civilized history, which is known as the couching method. Couching is done by taking a sharp object like a needle or a thorn and ever so gently stabbing their eye hole at weird angles until the lens moves out of the way. No lasers, no sedatives, no paralytics, just a rusty old pin and some elbow grease the way God intended. The majority of the time, this operation didn't work, usually just damaging the already blind eye irreparably. Shocker, right? And even if it did go as planned, you still, didn't have a lens in your eye. So you essentially went from, I can't tell if I'm dead or not, to, yes, it is quite yellow out today. By God. Something moved somewhere. A slightly more refined version of this operation is the suction method, which dates back to at least the 10th century AD, if not older. This procedure is described as requiring, quote, a large incision in the eye, a hollow needle, and an assistant with an extraordinary lung capacity. Though this reads like the setup to the world's most horrifying party trick, it's actually the bare minimum number of tools needed to completely extract the lens from the eye. In case you didn't pick up on how, here's a diagram. This method generally saw a greater success rate and fewer complications than its non-extracting counterpart, so hopefully you can sleep well tonight knowing that the number of human beings who have sucked a piece of somebody's living eyeball through a straw is above zero. Anywho, let's all just be thankful that we live in an era where procedures like these are a thing of the past. Now remember kids, even though the surgeries I described here do sound pretty easy to pull off, please don't try them at home.
That was crazy. I knew about the ancient cataract surgery, but I didn't know it involved someone sucking it out. That's just reminds me of that old urban legend that, hey, you should suck the poison out when someone's bitten by a snake. Don't do that either. That's just gonna create risk of contamination and doesn't even save the individual in question. Just use an experienced medical professional that has the aid of nuclear technology with advanced imaging things like a CAT scan or CT scan or PET scan. MRI use nuclear technology too. So, hey, if you support using nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, please join me on my journey to a clean nuclear energy future by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Today we're going to be looking at another video by the hilarious Sam O'Nella Academy called Tarrare, the Hungriest Man in History. Alleged this person could eat without any restriction at all. None of that little impulse to tell you to stop. That's from what I've heard anyway. I'm sure Sam will enlighten me more. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, I think we can all agree that there are few pastimes more grotesque than competitive eating. The concept of a bunch of guys pushing their anatomy to its limits just for sport leaves a bad taste in my mouth in more ways than one. But imagine if these men didn't adopt this habit just for fun. Imagine if some gross biological error forced them to eat like this for their entire life. Introducing Tarrare.
Wow.
Tarrare was born in France around 1772 to a poor farming family. It's said that his appetite was so voracious that, by his teens, Tarrare could eat an entire quarter of a cow carcass in a single day. You'd think he'd be like mega obese, but no, he only weighed 100 pounds by age 17. However, there were still a few things that stood out about Tarrare appearance-wise. For one, he had a huge, stretched-out mouth with horribly stained teeth. He could reportedly fit 12 eggs in his cheeks at once, much like a chipmunk keeping its chipmunk eggs warm. Additionally, when Tarrare was full, he'd get a crazy octomom gut going, and any other time, he'd have a huge flap of stretched-out skin hanging around his waist. He also stank to high hell, even by 18th century French peasant standards. He was described as reeking, quote, to such a degree that he could not be endured within the distance of 20 paces.
Wow.
So between all this and his horrendous outhouse flooding dumps, his family had had enough. Alright, you're eating us out of house and home here. You gotta go, man. You heard me. Kick bricks, Froggy. Wow, he just called a French person a frog. That's so racist. No, it's not. They're all French. The guy just looks like a frog. Oh. Well, too late. I'm already offended. That's fair. Dislike. After leaving home, Tarrare was forced to beg and steal just to satisfy his gargantuan appetite. Inevitably, people began to take notice of him, and eventually he landed a job as a street performer in Paris.
That's crazy. You know what else has the ability to just keep going without an impulse naturally? Well, that's nuclear reactions. 100% power in a nuclear power plant is fairly arbitrary and largely came up with more of a restriction based on the metallurgy of, say, the reactor vessel, various components in the secondary plant as well, as far as how many megawatts can this thing comfortably operate within safe margins. But the neutrons, the things actually causing the nuclear reactions in the reactor, you can ask them. They're not going to be able to tell you what 100% power is. That's entirely controlled by the reactor operators, and it will go up if you give it the opportunity to. You just give it enough fuel, give it enough reactivity. Think of reactivity as acceleration of the nuclear reactor. Can continue to grow until you just use up all the fuel. So a lot of the restrictions are just based on what the entire system is comfortable operating at, because nuclear power plants, you want to get up to 100% and just keep it there for as long as possible, because they're solid base load power systems. The limit on a reactor is not based on what the neutrons can do. This isn't the only thing I've heard it with. I've heard that for some of the new sports cars, the speed limit on those, like the Bugatti Veyron, for instance, the limit associated with that is based on the tires, not how powerful the engine is. So you can kind of use that same analogy there.
would hand Tarrare entire baskets of apples, eggs, and even wine corks, and watch in delight as he horked them down without the slightest hesitation. Normally this went off without a hitch, except for one time when he suffered a severe intestinal blockage.
Ooh, no.
Fortunately, the crowd was kind enough to carry him to the hospital, where he was treated with the strongest laxatives the 18th century had to offer. I would draw what happened next, but it would probably get my channel deleted, so let's just picture it for a few moments. Moving on. Cut to the year 1792.
Can only imagine.
This marks the beginning of the War of the First Coalition. Ever heard of it? Me neither. Who was in it? Fucking everyone. Anyway, Tarrare decided to enlist in the war. After all, maybe that profound emptiness he was feeling was just a lack of purpose in life. Turns out, no, he really was just psychotically hungry. Even after being granted quadruple rations, Tarrare would still be digging through the trash pile whenever he got the chance. After suffering extreme exhaustion, he was sent off to the military hospital in Soutzarin.
What I just say to point out is France is also one of the countries that has the most amount of nuclear power plants in terms of percentage of their energy production. So it's interesting a guy with a nuclear appetite is in what will later be the nuclear country.
There was so dumbfounded by the man's abilities that they decided to keep him there to run a few experiments, the first of which involved putting Tarrare in a room with a meal prepared for 15 people. Naturally, he ate the entire thing and immediately fell asleep. Next, they presented him with a raw eel.
Power.
In response, Tarrare crushed the eel's skull between his teeth before slurping down the entire creature in one go. Now, this is hair-clenchingly horrifying for a couple of reasons. Firstly, he put a whole frickin' eel in his stomach, but secondly, there had to be some point during digestion where the meat was gone but the bones still remained. Now, for those of you who don't know, an eel skeleton looks like this. That means Tarrare had all of those needle-sized ribs stabbing into the walls of his stomach at once, and he was fine. He also ripped a live cat apart with his bare hands, drank its blood, and ate everything but its bones, and then later gagged up the fur and skin like an owl, but
horrible.
You know, that's neither here nor there. After reviewing our data, I've come to the scientific conclusion that, yeah, we got a goddamn demon on our hands. But as we all know, with great devour comes great responsibility.
Yeah, so nuclear appetite, apparently nuclear containment structure being his belly. So one thing that's interesting is if that humans were really nuclear powered, you wouldn't need much food. It would be like, take one small pill and you wouldn't need to eat for 20 years or something like that, just considering how energy dense this pill would be, and it would keep you going. You also wouldn't need to sleep at all. That would be a little out there, but you wouldn't get to enjoy tasting good food. So I'm not advocating for nuclear powered people. I think that would be a little too crazy.
Since Tarrare was still technically enlisted, the military decided to utilize his abilities for the greater good. Hey Tarrare, it's me, the General. Listen, could you eat this box with a note in it for me? If you do it, we'll give you a wheelbarrow full of bull organs. Lo and behold, 2 days later, he passed the container in mint condition and was given his reward as promised. With this proof of concept, they made him an official spy and sent him into Prussia with a document in his belly to be delivered to an imprisoned French colonel. Unfortunately, there are a couple things Tarrare couldn't do that are generally important when sneaking into another country. A, he couldn't speak German, and B, it's pretty hard to maintain a low profile when you're running around like a madman, wolfing down garbage and mutilating small animals. So he ended up being captured by the enemy. Initially, he kept his mouth shut, for once, but after a whipping and a day in jail, Tarrare gave in. After confessing that he did, in fact, have vital intelligence snaking its way through his GI tract, the Prussians chained him to a latrine until the box emerged 30 hours later. The note wasn't actually anything important, so they just mock-executed him, gave him a severe beating, and sent him on his way. After all that, Tarrare returned to life at the hospital, desperate for a cure for his condition, but nothing they ever tried worked.
Tobacco pills, opium, yeah, I use that a lot. Juice cleanse, juice cleanse, bit early for that. Oh wow, IRL 4. No, wow.
Meanwhile, the man's endless hunger continued to get him into all sorts of trouble. He'd often sneak out of the hospital to eat the scraps behind the local butcher and fight stray dogs in the alley for their precious garbage. He'd also seek out patients undergoing bloodletting in order to take all their life juice for himself. On several occasions, he was even caught attempting to eat bodies in the mortuary. By this point in my research, I was so desensitized to this guy that I didn't even bat an eye when I first read that. I was just like, alright. Guess he must have been hungry. Anyway, the hospital staff begrudgingly tolerated Tarrare's buffoonery until one day when he went too far. Well, Tarrare, you've only had 3 mess hall raids, 4 miscellaneous trash-related mishaps, and 1 cadaver defiling, so I'd say, so far, this week's been pretty good. Doctor, we should probably inform you that a 14-month-old child has gone missing from their room.
Oh no.
Tarrare, look at me. Did you eat a fucking baby? Tarrare was promptly kicked out of the hospital and spent 4 years out and about doing, whatever horrific shit you can imagine. When he came back, he was suffering from advanced tuberculosis and died shortly after arrival. During his autopsy, the surgeons found that when they looked into his mouth, they could see all the way down his throat and into his stomach cavity. As you can imagine, his whole abdominal region was profoundly deformed. Basically, if this is a normal human, this is what they found inside Tarrare.
Wow. That is crazy to think about such a thing.
Like the man's mind, we can see that around 90% is devoted towards food and 10% towards everything else. So, moral of the story here is that, no, you know what, not even I can find anything resembling a moral here. Not all stories have a point to them. Sometimes they're just sad and disgusting from beginning to end.
Alright, I'm going to take back what I said about this guy having a nuclear analogy. That would not be good PR for the nuclear industry, or really anyone involved on both sides of the things, just because of how horrific that is. But I just feel bad for the guy. It's time for some more Salmonella Academy. Specifically, this one on banned food. I know there are times when eating and drinking is prohibited in the event of a radiation release. Let's check this one out.
Hey, Majors. So
Majors? Used to him saying, hey kids, I guess we got promoted? Cool.
I'd like to start off with a little biology lesson. When a species finds itself living on an island, it can start to evolve in strange ways based on the different pressures applied by the new environment. This is called island syndrome, and while it can manifest in a lot of ways, the biggest driving force is often a lack of predators. For example, the dodo lost its ability to fly since there was nothing to flee from. The saint killed a field mouse got twice as big since it no longer had to hide. And with no one around to bully them, the Sardinians started putting maggots in their cheese.
It is crazy how animals can kind of change their behavior. We actually saw something like that happen after the Chernobyl accident. What wasn't the case of an island, but it kind of had a similar effect with the Chernobyl exclusion zone. There was the absence of humans, or at least a large population of the humans, has enabled the ecosystems to actually thrive. No humans disturbing, no hunting. It's a bit of a wildlife sanctuary. Plus, with the radiation, the frogs changed color. Well, kind of. You see more of the black ones, and that's just higher levels of melanin. The ones in that blackish color are closer to the Chernobyl plant as a protective response to the radiation. Note that they didn't actually change color. It's more of just a population shift. You're seeing more of those in close proximity to, but kind of a similar sort of adaptation.
Meet Kazumartsu, literal translation, rotten cheese. It's made by taking a perfectly good wheel of pecorino and letting a special type of fly lay eggs in it. The fly babies then work to partially digest the cheese, rendering it goopy and wet and maybe quite tasty and worm-filled. Now, cheese as a concept is already quite suspect. It's clotted milk that you fill with bacteria and mold and let sit for a while. But cheese is safe and delicious. Cheese is my friend. I trust cheese. So my guard would be down around Kazumartsu. I've learned to look past a cheese's childhood. Strange upbringings are what give them
big nose. Oh no.
Their character. But it turns out, those maggots are still alive, and if you don't chew well enough, they can cause enteric myiasis, which is a fancy term for fly larvae living in your intestines. Symptoms are similar to food poisoning, except with the added psychic pain of knowing that, again, your bowels are full of squiggly new friends. It's for this reason
That's nasty.
that Kazumartsu is banned in the EU and elsewhere. A black market still exists, which is wild, and it's not a small one. In 2019, the illicit Kazumartsu trade was estimated to be worth 2 to 3 million euros annually. Personally, I would just do it prohibition style, like definitely don't put these fly eggs on this sumptuous wheel of pecorino. But if you do, you absolutely shouldn't keep it warm and damp for a week. But although it's traditional to leave the larvae alive when you eat your mag and cheese, some consumers still prefer them dead, shockingly.
It's fascinating how many nasty parts are in the preparation of certain foods. It really kind of puts things into perspective. I can't say I've ever had this type of cheese, but can understand why it's banned. Anything that makes you that sick just gets that contaminated. I know after a radiological release, when you get to a certain threshold, in the emergency planning, there will be a ban on eating and drinking within the vicinity of the power plant. We've actually run several drills on that where you couldn't actually eat anything during the drill. So it's gotten to where you'd actually get a good sized meal before the drill actually starts. Not that you're in any real danger. There's no real radiological release or anything. It's just a simulation. But people like to bring in a bunch of donuts and kolaches and stuff to be sure you have plenty of food for the rest of the day. But the reason why you would ban it in the event of a radiological release is internal dose is so much worse compared to external dose. And that's for two reasons. One is some of the more hazardous fission products could just get inside you if you eat them, such as cesium-137, a metal with a half-life of about 30 years, can get inside of your bloodstream. Now, eating any metal is not exactly the best thing for your kidneys, but it's also going to give you internal dose while it's being metabolized by your body. And the second thing is internal dose. It's a lot harder to control. And the second reason is it's just worse in terms of the magnitude of the dose. It's going to be affecting your internal organs. We take for granted that our skin and our clothes actually acts as a shield from a lot of forms of radiation, such as alpha particles and beta particles. It doesn't do much against gamma radiation, but it'll shield against a lot of alpha and betas. However, if it's inside your body, that's not going to help you. So that is why eating and drinking is banned during a radiological release.
In that case, one puts the cheese in a sealed bag, and when the maggots run out of oxygen, they writhe around and fling themselves all over the place.
Yeah.
This is heard as a distinct pitter-patter against the walls of the bag, and when the sound stops, the contents are ready to eat, like popcorn. Shark fin soup is one most of us have heard about already, mostly in reference to its effect on shark populations and the wastefulness that goes into making it. Until recently, though, I never looked into the nature of the dish itself. I figured, right, the fins are just the only part of the shark worth eating. Big whoop, it's probably not much different from, like, swordfish. Apparently, though, I had it backwards. Shark fins aren't even meat. They're made almost entirely of cartilage and collagen. They are the last part we should be eating. That's why it's only made into soup, because without being soaked in broth, it has zero flavor or nutritional value on it.
Kind of like how people put bones in soup, sure. Never had it. I've also heard of shark fin pie, but that's like an ice cream dessert. It's actually pretty good, but has nothing to do with actual shark fin.
Their only redeeming quality is their unique mouthfeel due to how stringly the collagen grows.
It looks like his Tarrare character, the guy that eats everything. If you want to see my reaction to that, I'll pin that one down in the comments below. That one's quite vile.
In structures called ceratotrichia. The texture has been described as somewhere between chewy and crunchy, which I find describes most things, actually. Other adjectives present on Wikipedia include snappy, gelatinous, and sinewy. The exact sensation of eating this substance remains a mystery to me, and the unintended side effect of all this research is that I now really want to try it. Like, it's a big trade. I've got to be the one that's wrong. There is imitation shark fin soup available, but I've already decided that it's not nearly as good, so I've come up with a compromise to this controversy. Everyone on Earth gets just one bite. Say there's 10 bites to a fin, 4 fins to a shark, 200 million sharks die, sure, a necessary casualty, but then we can end the practice forever. All done. You can finally rest, Mr. Ming. Come here, baby. Aww. Ackee. What? Ackee. Where? Ackee. The ackee is a fruit originally...
That's pretty clever. So back to the shark one, on the note of banned seafood. After Japan released treated wastewater from Fukushima. So this water was filtered, processed, but before that, it was actually stored in tanks at the Fukushima site, so some of it could decay away even prior to treatment. It uses a process called the Advanced Liquid Processing System in order to filter, purify, and treat the radioactive wastewater. And it's monitored by radiation monitors and is sampled by chemistry technicians, and these have the highest level of scrutiny for water chemistry sampling before it gets released into the environment. So after all the processing and the sampling, they were found to be within release standards, and not the special post-accident one. They didn't make anything else up. The regular radioactive effluent standards that required them to be below a certain level of activity. the same ones that are used routine releases around the world. Because after all, at this point, considering how heavily treated and how they let a lot of it decay away, you're basically pumping water into more water at that point. However, China still banned the import of seafood from Japan. All of Japan, not even just the prefectures near Fukushima. Which is ironic because Chinese nuclear power plants and other effluent sources do not meet the same international wastewater standards. I'm not saying that it's at dangerous levels, but it's ironic for them to do so when their own effluent standards aren't up to the same international standards that are accepted in the rest of the world. So Japanese seafood is still safe to eat, at least when it comes to level of radioactivity. I can't speak for individual allergy cases or anything like that.
From West Africa, which is most commonly associated with Jamaican cuisine, where it appears in such dishes as ackee and saltfish. These alien
Never had
kidneys
that.
here are called the arils, and they're the only part
Alien kidneys. It does look like that. Well done.
of the fruit that's actually eaten. The flavor is on the savory side, being described as kind of nutty or
terrifying.
bean-like. What makes the ackee controversial, though, is the effects it can cause when prepared improperly.
no.
If the arils are allowed to completely ripen, they're harmless. But if you eat them too early, or don't thoroughly clean off all the non-aril stuff, they can cause Jamaican vomiting sickness. This disease doesn't sound real, it sounds
Some make you sick without waiting long enough. That's a bit like radioactive decay. You gotta wait for the bad stuff to go away. And also cleaning and deconning, so there's some overlap there. Wow.
like it belongs next to Eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings, but that's actually an official term, and as for symptoms, it does what it says on the tin. Plus maybe death. While ackee-based products aren't
Plus death. Wow. I've never heard of Jamaican vomiting sick. And I've been to Jamaica a couple of times, which is... Never got sick, though.
outright illegal in the United States, they are very tightly regulated, and the raw fruit itself cannot be imported. So if you're
Sad
American and
fruit.
want to try it, your options are fully cooked canned ackee or going to Florida where a few people grow it domestically. Next we have
Not surprised. If it was going to be grown anywhere in the U.S., it would be Florida.
bird's nest soup. This is another one that I've vaguely heard of, and for years I just assumed the name was a playful metaphor like ants on a log or shit on a shingle. Turns out, nope, this dish contains an actual bird nest. Not like a pile of twigs like I was picturing, but rather a specific type of nest only made by certain species of swiftlets. These nests are mostly made out of mucins, which are a set of proteins that, among
Okay.
other things, serve to thicken all those wonderful secretions our bodies make. There's a little bit in human
Sam is getting better and better at these terrifying images. Wow. Mucin makes mucus, yeah. Makes sense.
saliva, a little bit more in mucus, and in swiftlet
Smile
saliva,
face.
look out, pal. So all the swiftlet does is it finds a nice
I like how the other eye he drew on the wall. He did that with a few of his other drawings, too. I just thought I'd point it out now. It just adds to the charm. I love it.
wall, starts laying out fat strings of slobber, which dry, and eventually she's got a nice place to roost. That is, right up until some gourmand says,
Today I crave bird spit.
I'm not sure I could handle much more of this. Gourmand. Alright.
You can keep the eggs though.
and they then reconstitute it back into its original gelatinous texture. Unfortunately, these nests can't enter the US, since, believe it or not, eating bird saliva is a great way to catch bird flu. And now the time has come to speak of the ortolan. The ortolan is a kind of bunting, which is a sort of passerine, which is a type of bird. They're birds. Like
I love the word association. I've run into this a few times trying to relate certain things, and it's usually on things that I know nothing about, like costume design or something, where I hear one word and then it's another word that I don't know. Hopefully I try to make nuclear stuff readily accessible, but I can totally understand if one silly word just sounds like another one.
many animals, they have a long history of being eaten by the French. But what separates the ortolan from your average squab or pheasant is the unique way in which it is prepared and eaten. They're typically caught with nets and kept in the dark, which causes them to overeat for some reason. Once it's about twice as fat,
Wow.
the entire bird is then thrown into
Fatten
a
up and eat
container
it.
of brandy, alive, and sealed in. While this serves to
Sounds so stereotypically French.
marinate the creature, it also drowns in the process, thereby killing one bird with no stones. The ortolan
Yeah,
is then
kill with
roasted,
brandy.
plucked, and presented whole to the consumer, who inserts the carcass into their mouth.
Just the way.
Mouth feet first. As they chew, one hand continues holding the bird's head while the other picks out the larger bones. This whole ritual is usually performed with a towel or large napkin over one's head. There's a few explanations for the purpose of the towel. Some say it's just there to keep the aromas in, while others say it's there to, quote, shield from God's eyes the shame of such a decadent and disgraceful act.
Wow.
Yeah, this one I'm okay with not trying, actually. Notable fans of this dish include, not joking, Bill Cosby and the guy who invented the lobotomy. Ought to be part of that social club. Our mission is to eat birds whole and then make people not remember things. Killing ortolans was banned across the EU in 2007, not for any ethical reason, but because French people did this so much that the entire ortolan population was threatened. Thankfully, as of 2018, their conservation status is under least concerns.
That is a fast recovery after all of that. It's amazing how humans have that much impact on the population of a certain species that within, 5 years, the population went from threatened to least concern. It's like those old adages I remember used to frighten children about, if you do something bad, a kitten will die. Well, if that was actually the case and people stopped doing it, the world would be overrun by cats because something's got to keep every population in check. Kind of like managing a nuclear reactor. You keep in mind, whenever you're operating something at steady state, that means power level is stable. The amount of neutrons in equals the amount of neutrons out. So whenever you do something to the plant, you just need to think about how that will impact reactivity, or how will it change reactor power, whether it go up or down. It's all a delicate balance, both with nuclear physics, nuclear operational physics, and with ecology. It's really cool.
So hopefully the French can get back to it soon. Anyway, that's all I have for...
That's exactly right. In order to control something at a certain level, then yeah, you got to accommodate for the inflows and outflows. This one was really good. A lot of gross, a lot of stuff I've never heard of, just like every other episode of Salmonella that I've watched, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Today we're going to be looking at another one of Salmonella's videos called Literal Animal Planets. Just sounds goofy. This was recommended to me in the comments. Again, I appreciate the recommendations. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, it's Wildlife Wednesday. So today, I decided to make some animal planets. No, not that animal planet. What I mean is, if you took every member of a certain group of animals and just, rolled them into a single ball in space, how big would that sphere be? And I got some interesting answers, but before I show you my findings, I'll quickly go over my process.
A mess.
So first, I found the full population of a given creature or set of creatures. Then I would take the average weight of that creature and multiply the two together to get the total mass of that creature on Earth. To go from mass to volume, however, you still need the density of whatever you're measuring. Fortunately, the density of all animals is quite similar, partly due to the fact that the vast majority of creatures are at least 70% water by weight. Couple that with the fact that the ratio of fat, muscle, and bone or exoskeleton in all creatures is at least vaguely similar, and we can estimate the density of all animals to be around the same. Water is exactly 1 kilogram per liter, and then I'm throwing in a plus or minus 0.1 as a rounding error for the other material involved. As such, the values at play here are going to have 2 significant figures at most. I've included a link in the description to a spreadsheet with all my data and calculations. Quick disclaimer before we get started, a lot of this is based on estimation, particularly in the case of animal population. It's actually quite difficult to get a definitive count of a given animal on Earth, so all of the following is simply based on science's best guesses. Also, this is by no means a comprehensive list, it's just those that I could find the most reliable data on. One more clarification, the amount of specificity I give is the amount I apply to a given sphere, right? So whereas a blue whale sphere is just that one species, an ant sphere would cover all types of ants. That being said, let's roll.
This is an interesting idea. It's very high level, back of the envelope math. Engineers, nuclear engineers in particular, do this sort of thing all the time. And we all do it very conservatively. Another name for it is radcon math, or radiation contamination. It involves just high level estimates, super overestimates. We're talking like 1 + 1 = 100, just to be sure, kind of back of the envelope calculations just so we can make sure it's like, all right, it's not about being accurate, it's about being close enough just that even under your ridiculous assumptions, you're going to make it okay. And I like seeing someone else do this. This is great.
First up is the blue whale sphere. Although they are freaking gigantic, there is only like 10,000 of them on Earth. So the sphere only came out to around 140 meters in diameter. That's about the same height as the Great Pyramid. A bit larger than that is the elephant sphere, which came out to around 170 meters. Next up is the domesticated cat sphere at around 180. That's only slightly smaller than the Roman Colosseum, which was 190 in diameter. Next up is the camel sphere at around
It's got a hump on it.
meters. Slightly larger was the domesticated dog sphere at 280. Then the chicken sphere at 330.
There is a joke around the spherical chicken or the spherical cow. I think I've heard both jokes, but the joke is that the farmer is concerned about egg production, so he has a theoretical physics or a theoretical physicist come over to investigate the issue. The theoretical physicist comes up with a solution, but he says it will only work if the chickens are spherical and it takes place in a vacuum to increase egg production. Basically, all of the crazy assumptions you make just to create a simplistic mathematical model for a layperson to utilize. And I love it. I don't know if that's what inspired Sam to make this video, but he made a couple of references here already, and I greatly appreciate it.
The horse sphere is at 370 meters in diameter. Larger than that was the ant sphere,
There's a lot of ants,
which came down
tiny.
to around 420 meters. I almost didn't include this one as it is very difficult to find a definitive answer on ant populations. All those sources I found differed by like an order of magnitude or two, so I just averaged them out. Anyway,
That's
though,
fair.
imagine like...
By the way, the nuclear engineer wouldn't average them out. You would take like the maximum one and round it up. So I don't know if they'd give you 4,000 meters or what, but that's something.
Falling back first into this thing and just having all the little minuscule creatures just consume you into their mass. Feeling itchy yet? You should. Anyway, this ball was just shy of the Empire State Building, which stood at 440.
What was that? Oh, nice, because 420 reference. Gotcha. And it's green.
Next up is the sheep sphere, which got up
There's a
to
lot of sheep.
650. Close to that is the Vatican City, which
The
is
Vatican
663 meters across. That means the Vatican is just big enough to hold all the sheep in the world. If that's not a metaphor, I don't know what is. Near the top of our list is the Antarctic krill planet, which reached about 950 meters. The people planet was just a smidge larger at 960. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that there are 7.4 billion people in this sphere, it would only take 585 of them stacked toe-to-head to reach the height of the sphere.
That reminds me of one of those crazy SCP scenarios. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. If you do, let me know in the comments.
Anyway, though, you'd think the human planet would be the largest, since for our size we're so disproportionately represented on Earth. However, our largest planet is actually due as a result of our giant population, as well as our voracious appetite. The cow planet you see
the
is
spherical
at a
cows.
diameter of about 1.2 kilometers. That's around 2/3 of the length of the Brooklyn Bridge. So all this time, you humans thought you ruled the Earth, when in fact, we are merely the servants to our cow overlords. I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
That's fascinating. They all seem very small when you actually think of all the animals in the world, but you're packing them all together, and you're dealing with, something in 3 dimensions here that just, as tall as it is wide. So yeah, the thing can certainly build up in mass very, very quickly, but that was a fascinating thought experiment. Today we're going to be looking at another heavily requested Salmonella video called Creative Weapons of the Medieval Era. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, when most people think of the Middle Ages, they think of them as being like humanity's dumb teenage years, where all we did was play harpsichord in our room and burn heretics with our friends. But that's not entirely true. In fact, I would argue that the medieval era saw just as much genius as any other period in time. It's just most of that genius went towards finding new and creative ways to brutally slaughter those you disagree with. Here's a few highlights. First, we'll talk about the werewolf. So, as you can imagine, medieval castles were not easy to break into. They were basically like those jungle gym things that Chuck chunky cheeses, massive in size, intentionally confusing layout, security everywhere, and by the end of your visit, you'd probably
Dysentery.
end up with some kind of disease. So in order to help
Oh, no.
penetrate fortresses, medieval armies would often utilize siege weapons, one of the most popular of which was the trebuchet. Now this device is interesting enough on its own, but it gets better. So around 1300 AD, King Edward I of England was in the process of
This would be when
invading
medieval
Scotland.
castles were
However,
pretty big.
one fortress known as Stirling Castle was giving him a lot of trouble. He laid siege to the building for many months without any real progress. Then one day he woke up and had a revelation. Hey guys, listen, why are we wasting our time building all these regular-sized trebuchets when we could just build one giant one and call it a day? So that's what he did.
Sure.
This gargantuan war
That's the same design philosophy behind building nuclear weapons. Build one giant bomb and call it a day, rather than a bunch of little ones.
machine was known as the Warwolf and stood at around 6 stories tall. To give a bit of perspective, this is about as tall as King Kong was in his largest film depiction. So basically,
go.
picture a giant fucking
Yes,
ape launching
giant
boulders
monkeys.
like they're baseballs, and you've got a pretty good idea of what the Warwolf was capable of. It was so intimidating that when the Scots saw the English constructing the beast outside the castle, they immediately surrendered
Wow.
out of fear. But then Edward was like,
I guess they didn't have enough troops just to get them while they were out of position. And yeah, that sounds about right, because I believe the English outnumbered the Scottish at this time.
fuck that, I'm gonna test this bad boy out, and proceeded to take pot shots on the castle
There you go.
anyway. Another devious product of the Middle Ages was a flammable substance known as Greek fire.
Now, did you know that nuclear catapults existed? This is the Davy Crockett, basically the Fat Man from the Fallout franchise. Yeah, this thing was real. The warhead was pretty small, on the order of, I think, 20 to 200 tons of TNT yield, so pretty small as far as nuclear weapons go. But this is a nuclear weapon, so whoever gets hit with this thing at close range, the radiation dose is going to be nasty, especially because it's neutron dose, since it is indeed a fission device. Similar warheads of size can also be used in so-called suitcase nukes, these crazy portable inventions used during the Cold War. Catapults existed with nuclear weapons. That's pretty crazy.
Contrary to popular belief, Greek fire was not invented by the ancient Greeks. Rick Riordan, you lying.
Byzantium, wasn't it?
It was actually invented in the 7th century AD
Yeah.
by the Byzantines, who happened to inhabit Greece at the time. Historians still don't know exactly what it was made of, but they do know
50%
that it acted a
50%
lot
fire.
like napalm, sticking to ships, sticking to people, even floating and continuing to burn on the surface of the water. The Byzantines also had these siphon-like tubes that they'd put on the front of their boats to pour Greek fire on the enemy, kind of like makeshift flamethrowers.
I've heard they've made some of these to look like dragons' heads, so it looks like we have this dragon's maw just spitting fire everywhere to intimidate the enemy. Don't know if that's true or not, and I wonder how effective that would be at funneling the Greek fire and making it an effective weapon. But I bet it would look cool.
These were retired pretty quickly, though, mostly because when you put the words makeshift and flamethrower next
Yeah.
to each other, you're bound to run into some problems
Not the
eventually.
best safety
Our
record.
next bright idea comes from a woman known as Olga of Kiev. So Olga was a princess who ruled the area around the capital of modern-day Ukraine from 945 to 963 AD, and she had quite a track record for being just a total badass. For example, the Drevlians, a tribe of people under
Sure.
Kiev's control, once sent 20 men to Kiev in order to convince Olga to marry their prince, under the pretense
Is it Kiev or Kiev? I don't know. Or both of those wrong.
that if they did marry, the prince could claim her rule over Kiev. In response, she had all 20 of them buried alive. She then
Wow.
sent a letter to the prince saying she accepted his proposal, but she would need a bunch of his most distinguished governors to escort her on the journey. Once the men showed up, Olga was
letter.
like, "Hey guys, long journey, huh? How'd you like to take a bath in this here bathhouse?" They were like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." "Okay, have fun, you guys."
Wow.
Man, it's like a sauna in here. It is a sauna, dipshit. You have a point.
2
Long
seconds.
story short, this lady just did not give a heck. My favorite story about her starts with her besieging a Drevlian city that refused to pay tribute to her. The people in the city were already well aware of the type of rampaging that Olga was capable of, so they were already scared shitless. But when she showed up, she was like, "Alright, you know what guys, I'm gonna play nice. Just bring me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household and I'll be on my way." Okay. What are they for exactly? We're just hungry.
Huh.
I mean, we got some food too. We could just give... I'm sorry, did I fucking stutter? Alright, birds it is. Then, once the creatures were in Olga's hands, she had
Okay.
each of her soldiers tie a cloth-bound piece of sulfur to one of the birds' feet, which was then set alight. The birds were then released all at once, and when they flew back into the
Firebird
city,
bombing.
their nests acted like little piles of tinder, resulting in nearly every house in the entire city erupting in flames simultaneously. And while the whole place burned to the ground, Olga just sat and watched.
Wow. Do you think if she existed today, she would put some sort of nuclear material on those birds that would give people nasty dose? I wouldn't be surprised. Though actually, the fire would still be more destructive because you're actually wanting to destroy the structures rather than just the people. But either way, she'd probably do it with nuclear just because everyone's afraid of nuclear.
By the way, it's worth mentioning that, after her death, Olga was canonized as a Catholic saint, presumably around the same time as Saint Tiffany, who went around pushing in the soft spots of babies, and Saint Jerry the Goat Fucker, who, as the name implies, fucked a lot of goats. In conclusion,
I'm fairly
pay your
certain one of
taxes.
those isn't
To my
real.
loyal subscribers, I'll see you in 3 months. I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
That's crazy. It just goes to show you that brutal innovations in weapons technology is not a new thing. It's been around for a very, very long time, and it includes nuclear examples. So there you go. But hey, if you're interested in peaceful uses for nuclear technology instead, please join me on a journey to a clean, safe, sustainable, reliable nuclear energy future by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Today we're going to be looking at another hilarious Salmonella video, this one also heavily requested, called The Forms of Carbon as Alcoholic Drink. And maybe I will show them as nuclear reactors. Let's take a look.
Hey kids, today I'll be discussing the alcoholic equivalents of the various allotropes of carbon.
I know Hey Kids is his intro, but hey kids, let's talk about alcohol. That's pretty good.
For those of you that don't know, an allotrope is just the various forms that carbon atoms can arrange themselves into. But anyway, let's
Cool.
get started. So amorphous carbon is like beer. It's the first form to ever be produced by humans, likely by accident. It's also the weakest form. It has a bunch of varieties, most of which taste terrible. And you need a whole lot of it if you want to have a good cookout.
So I would say amorphous, probably most like your pressurized water reactor. Not exactly the first kind, but there's a lot of varieties of them, and they are probably one of the most prevalent. The vast majority of the reactors in the United States are pressurized water reactors, as well as other parts of the world. It's very simple. Reactor coolant is simply liquid water. It stays pressurized, so it stays in a liquid state the entire time, despite being at extreme temperatures and extreme pressures. Give you a sense of pressure over 2200 psi. The water coolant just goes straight to the steam generator. The steam generator makes steam, turns a turbine, produces electricity. Really, the only difference between this and, say, a natural gas plant or a coal plant is the heat source. But as a result of having your heat source like this, completely carbon-free, very clean. One key feature of a pressurized water reactor is what you see in this diagram is the entire nuclear part of the plant. No radioisotopes get into the turbine or the secondary part of the plant. Keeps it very safely contained.
Graphite is like wine. It's almost as old as amorphous carbon, having been used by humans since ancient times. However, it's significantly stronger. Up until recently, only the rich could really get much enjoyment out of it. But today, most individuals can use it if they choose, but not all varieties are equal.
So for the second type, we'll go ahead and go with boiling water reactors. I could kind of see the same analogy using wine for that. Not as widely used as the beer reactors, the pressurized water reactors, but still fairly common. As far as the price goes, I would say they're similar, but definitely boiling water reactors have its own little niche. This is where the void coefficient comes in to discussion. You've probably heard the term void coefficient from the Chernobyl series, but in the case of these boiling water reactors, the void coefficient is negative. That is to say, you increase the amount of steam in the primary, the reactor will shut itself down. The main difference between this one and pressurized water reactors is steam is produced within the reactor vessel. So the reactor is hydraulically connected to the secondary part, However, radioactive material is still largely restricted inside the containment building. But the steam lines are still heavily monitored to ensure no leakage occurs to the environment, to the secondary part of the plant. They are monitored in pressurized water reactors as well, by the way, just in case of a steam generator tube rupture. But this particular type of reactor, also very safe, very widely used.
Diamond is like vodka. First of all, it's very strong, the strongest form that's likely to be found in the average household. It's typically valued based on its purity and clarity, though flavored varieties do exist. Though it can be manufactured right here at home, most people seem to prefer it when it's from far-off lands.
Seems kind of fake, prefer it from... That's interesting.
And remember never to use too much of it, or else you might regret it later.
So due to the rarity of diamonds, let's go with something a little bit more exotic, like the molten salt reactor. This one requires a lot of extra equipment in the case of being able to make the molten salt reactor coolant loops. It is more expensive because you have to fabricate all this equipment, get a whole bunch of specialists involved, and does have that largely perceived, but people do have their concerns over proliferation and using the plutonium, which is bred in these sort of reactors, as a nuclear weapon, just like with blood diamonds. This one's a good bit more exotic. And note when I said this plutonium is converted in there, this reactor can actually produce more fuel than it is used. Now, that isn't to say it can be continuously operated without having to stop and refuel. This plutonium that is used can be saved for a later fuel cycle. So, in a way, it does have that potential to eventually pay for itself, but these were never widely used, largely due to the fears of proliferation. And also, at least in the 50s and 60s, uranium was thought of as being far more scarce than it actually was. So there wasn't as much of an economic need to be making your own fuel from your reactors. By the way, this isn't a completely unique feature to the molten salt reactor, the breeder reactor. Other types of reactors can have this capability. Even pressurized water reactors can make plutonium. They just don't make more than how much uranium they burn out. What's interesting, in the pressurized water reactor that I worked at, towards the end of a cycle, over 20% of the fuel you're burning is actually plutonium, which is interesting because the reactor responds faster towards the end of life because plutonium is so much more reactive than uranium.
Graphene is brandy. It's similar to graphite in structure, but it's put through a process to make it more pure, and as a result, it's much stronger.
Graphene/brandy. We're going to go ahead and go with the infamous RBMK reactor, the Chernobyl design. Because it is similar, it's actually a type of boiling water reactor. You'll notice on the steam separators in this diagram that that boiling does indeed occur within this sort of reactor design. But its biggest feature is actually moderated by graphite. So there's your more direct connection, but I figured comparing it to graphite, just based on that aspect alone, would have been a little dull. So let's go for a more spicier option. The RBMK is interesting, to say the least, and it could actually have some potential. It's just a lot of safety features were cut with it. The graphite-tipped control rods is infamous. You don't want to put the same material as your control rods, the things that shut down the reactor, as the moderator, the thing that makes the reactor produce power. One of the things that makes the reactor produce power. That's just bad engineering written all over it. So they could have just used boron or silver, indium, cadmium, or literally any other type of control rod material there is. Some things that slows down the fission reaction on the length of the rod entirely. And another design flaw is make the rods drop faster. And it isn't a size thing. The reactor core that that I worked at was 14 feet long, and they could fall to the bottom in 2 seconds instead of 20 seconds. This was an improvement that was made after the Chernobyl accident, but yeah. And the positive void coefficient is also questionable. I guess that you can say that is giving the brandy a little bit of a kick, but that by itself isn't necessarily dangerous. It's those awful control rod designs, and everything wrong with the Soviet Union in their operating crew is what ultimately made Chernobyl. I'm not recommending any more RBMKs be built. I just, the reactor by itself could be, you can design an RBMK to be safer. They just didn't.
Fullerenes are absinthe. It's not as mainstream as the other varieties, mostly only being used by the intellectual types. It's also claimed to have a bunch of properties not shared by any other form out there. But despite all its hype, it has little real-world application currently.
For absinthe, we'll go ahead and go with the can-do reactor. So I mentioned that it's not as mainstream, so you just see this in Canadian nuclear power plants. It has a few interesting features. One, meaning the heavy water, which is another word for maple syrup as a moderator. I'm just kidding. It's actually deuterium. So most hydrogen in water has just a hydrogen nucleus, it's just a proton. Deuterium, heavy water, is 1 proton, 1 neutron, that particular isotope of hydrogen. And so you do have to enrich heavy water, but you can also just use natural uranium. You don't have to enrich the uranium. So it's like, so the cost trade-off is the cost of enriching water versus enriching uranium. So there's a bit of a trade-off. Another cool aspect of it is the reactor, you can refuel while the reactor is still operating. A few guys I know who operated these sort of reactors could refer to it as the oven or the rotisserie. So you're making power rotisserie style with the can-do reactor. I think that's a pretty cool concept. So you could theoretically keep the reactor running without refueling, though there are other reasons to shut down a reactor other than refueling and other than emergencies. You will still have to do maintenance on your turbine building or on your steam generators or something. But compared to most nuclear power plants that operate on an 18 to 24 month fuel cycle, having to refuel every 18 to 24 months, they can potentially go longer without refueling, but you would still have to do some periodic maintenance. Either way, I think it's a cool design. I'm kind of surprised that it's just a Canadian thing.
Finally, carbine is like pure alcohol. Despite its simplicity, it's extremely difficult to produce with current methods, except in very small amounts. If you were to have a bunch of it, however, it would be more than twice as strong as diamonds.
For the carbine analogy, have to go with a fusion reactor. I know this is a little different, but right when he mentioned that, hey, it has the potential to be over twice as strong, but we can't produce that much of it, that's clearly the challenges associated with fusion. So this design right here is a tokamak. Completely different principle towards every other reactor I talked about already. In this design, all that complicated stuff you see in that circular looking thingy is basically around just making conditions hot enough, contained enough, and enough pressure to induce fusion. So bringing together much smaller elements such as hydrogen, helium-3, lithium-3, and bringing them together to produce heat. But that's the main difference. The rest, it says in little power conversion system, you're still just boiling water. So it's the same overall concept, but the idea behind fusion is if we can reach enough important milestones in terms of energy conversion ratio and basically get a lot more energy than what we put into it, this could potentially produce a lot more energy than any of those fission reactors I talked about earlier. We just got to get there. I'm hopeful for fusion, but of those But I can see any of those other designs taking off a lot more, at least in the near term, with the exception of RBMK. I don't really need to see any more of those.
Hopefully, this forced analogy has been at least vaguely informational. But anyway, that's all for today. I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
And that ends my forced analogy, keeping pace, or trying to keep pace with Sam's forced analogy. I think he did a little bit of a better job, but let me know what you think. And hey, if you had a different idea for which reactor to correlate to each type of carbon or each type of alcohol, let me know what you'd pick. And if you support the continued advancement and use of a whole bunch of fun nuclear power plant, nuclear reactor designs, please join me on my journey to a safe, clean, reliable, sustainable energy future using nuclear power by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Today we're going to be looking at another heavily requested, hilarious Salmonella Academy video on the banana republics. Or should I say the radioactive republics, since bananas are radioactive.
Hey kids, do you like fashionable, high-quality apparel at an affordable price?
Oh, at the clothing
too bad,
store.
because that's not what we're talking about today. I'm gonna learn you all a thing or two about the real banana republics. Our story begins during the turn of the 20th century in Central and South America. Agriculture's kind of a big deal right now. You've got a ton of little plantations all over the place growing bananas, sugar, pineapples, that kind of thing. And they're doing alright for themselves, no big deal. But then refrigeration happened, and it changed everything. Because now produce could be kept fresh for way
look at
longer
the
in
cute little
transit,
bananas.
meaning the fruit companies could suddenly open up their business to the international market, their biggest new trade partner being the United States. This massive opportunity gave rise to three main companies, known as the United Fruit Company, Cuyamel Fruit Company, and the Vaccaro Bros. By growing, shipping, and selling fruit, these three firms made just obscene amounts of money, a lot of which went towards buying out smaller family-owned farms and plantations. This allowed them to make even obscener amounts of money, until eventually the only competition that remained was each other. And then shit got real. The year is 1910. One of the companies I mentioned, Cuyamel, was doing most of its business in the country of Honduras, when the president of Honduras, Miguel Davila, decided to give a land grant to the Vaccaro Bros in exchange for helping to build some roadways. In doing so, they basically stole a bunch of Cuyamel's potential plantations and gave them to a competitor. So Samuel Zamuri, owner of Cuyamel, said to himself, "Dang, I hate those guys. If only there was some way for a guy like me to significantly influence the world around him for his own personal gain." Wait a minute. So he used a portion of his McDuck-esque fortune to hire a mercenary army, which he gave to one of his friends, former Honduran President Manuel Bonilla. And together, they overthrew the entire fucking government of Honduras.
Wow.
Yeah. Should have called it Cuyamel. Anyway, Bonilla took power and gave very generous concessions to Cuyamel and United as thanks. But then America saw this, and they were like, "Hey, that's not very freedom of you, young man." To which Zemmour replied, "It's okay, we're gonna help this country succeed. After all, politics and business are essentially the same thing." Well,
now what if nuclear power companies took over governments, nuclear republics? Hopefully in a less violent way. It'd be interesting. Trying to think if there's ever been an opportunity where an electricity provider took over a country. Usually it's the other way around because a lot of utilities are public. In fact, the only example I'm thinking of right now is Midgar from Final Fantasy VII, and that didn't exactly turn out too well with the Shinra Electric Power Company. So, might not work out for the best, but hey, we'd see more nuclear power plants.
I suppose it's not our place to be policing the governments of other nations yet. Still though, also, nanners. Alright, I'm sold, do what you want. So with their interests secured, the businesses continued to thrive and expand. But since they got cut so many breaks by the government, very little of their commerce actually ended up benefiting Honduras as a whole. In fact, the national debt of Honduras got so bad that the government ended up not being able to perform a lot of its functions. So in response, the three fruit companies stepped in and said, "No worries, we got this," and decided to basically build the nation's infrastructure for them, including roads, railways, shipping lines, telegraphs, telephone lines, radio towers. They even switched the whole country off to the US dollar. Keep in mind, this wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. It was mostly just to make their own businesses function more efficiently. But it was helpful either way. Anyway, now, not only did they have total power over their plantations, but also a monopoly over nearly every major industry in the country. Many other Central American nations soon followed this pattern, creating a corrupt sort of symbiosis whereby the fruit companies get huge tax breaks and land grants in exchange for a modernized infrastructure and payoffs to the rich minority. And so, the banana republics were born. Sounds like a pretty sweet gig, right? And it was. For the upper 5% of the populations who happen to hold some direct share in the plantations or shipping lines. For your average Jose, though, life mostly consisted of working on land that wasn't even theirs in exchange for dirt-poor wages. So that's how things were for like a decade and a half.
So it's pure capitalism works, no regulatory bodies. I mean, this was the early 1900s, so it was pretty unhinged back then.
Point, Coyamel was bought out by United, but then Zamore became the owner of the whole thing, somehow, and the Vaccaro company was renamed as Standard Fruit. Then one day, in 1944, the country of Guatemala had a democratic revolution, and the newly elected leader, Juan José Arevalo, wasn't happy with how the companies treated his people, so he implemented several reforms, like a minimum wage law and universal suffrage. And while the populace got a lot of benefit out of this, United Fruit most certainly did not, because more rights for their workers means less profits for the business as a whole. Then Guatemala got...
There's ways to get more profits, but they probably didn't. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, a sacrifice of human rights for more profits, but this probably wasn't your most benevolent corporation.
New president, Jacobo Arbenz, and he continued these reforms. And United continued to get the metaphorical shaft until finally, in 1953, they decided to go to the USA for help. Oh, Eisenhower. Yo, what's up? This Jacobo guy, he's making us pay minimum wages. Well, that doesn't sound very good for business. That's not all, though. He's also taking our unused land and giving it back to the people. Does that sound familiar?
Oh,
dear.
You make him think communist.
By the way it's looking, Dwight, I'd say he's a dirty... Oh, God. Collectivizing? No. Commie. Commie! Commie! Yeah, go get him, Dwight.
That voice is amazing.
Holy shit, you actually did it. World Star! And from that point onward, Guatemala was ruled by a series of US-backed dictatorships, all the way up until 1996. This kind of situation happened in several other places and times as well, almost always driven by some combination of red fear and yellow love. I won't give any more details for the sake of time, but that doesn't mean they weren't big deals. So you might be wondering, where did these companies go? Surely the clan of banana shenanigans can't still be around today. Well, that's where you're wrong. They're still in operation, just under different names. Standard Fruit changed their name in 1991 to become none other than Dole Food Company.
Yeah?
You know, when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Super Monkey Ball, and I used to wonder, what kind of cruel tyrant would just stick an ape in a ball for their own amusement? Well, now I know. Those bastards. As for United, one day in 1976, their CEO decided he couldn't take the heat anymore, so he jumped out the fucking window. That's a real thing, look it up. Then some other guy bought the company and renamed it to, drumroll please, Chiquita Banana. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The face you once knew as an innocent, fun-loving dancer-slash-fruit merchant is actually a ruthless tyrant who overthrows democracies and undermines basic human rights for her own profit.
It's silly, but it is interesting to see the origins of companies that you see now. One example in nuclear was the Tennessee Valley Authority that was formed as a response to the Great Depression, with nationalizing a lot of the power industries within the Tennessee Valley, and they own a few nuclear power plants. Who knew?
Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
I never knew that about the origin stories of Dole and Chiquita Banana. That's a crazy history behind some of those companies. It may be for the better that nuclear power companies didn't buy countries. That would just give people more of a reason to not like them. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Sam Ognella Academy's videos on where religious symbols come from. Let's check it out.
Hey kids, it's That Happened Thursday. So today I'll discuss where different religious symbols come from.
Probably earned myself a place in every version of how these drawings are. Oh, that's good.
First up is Christianity. As most of you know, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified despite being supposedly sinless, so the cross is representative of his martyrdom. Personally, I always thought choosing the cross of all things to signify the whole religion was at least a little silly. Right, my prophet? He was a great dude, spread peace and love all along the land, performed many bountiful miracles. And then right at the end, he fell face first into a fucking bear trap and died. So that's our symbol, whole religion bear trap. Peace.
That's fascinating. I always wondered that. Why focus on the way he died and not what he lived and what he taught? It also makes you wonder if this was a different time period and he was killed via the electric chair or a lethal injection, if the symbol would be a chair or a syringe.
Love, compassion, and bear trap.
So let's talk about the classic symbol for the atom. Circle in the middle with a bunch of little things orbiting it. That's roughly based off of the John Dalton model of the atom that is pretty old. Atoms don't actually look like this. Of course, the arrangement of the electrons doesn't follow a stable orbital pattern such as the solar system, but hey, it's a really cool looking logo, and we still use it to this day. You see it on like the Nuclear Energy Institute, the International Atomic Energy Association, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A lot of people still love this symbol, and I have to say it is still a really cool symbol, but just don't take it too literally as to what it actually means.
Next up is the Jewish Star of David. It's been used now and then since the 11th century, but it only really got popular around the 1800s. There's no real special meaning behind it.
I like how I think he kind of drew him a bit off on purpose like that, and I think it's awesome. It just adds to the charm.
They just took a random symbol that was kind of around called the hexagram and made it their own. Bro, check out my new religious symbol. I'm pretty sure you didn't come up with that. Pretty sure that's a thing elementary schoolers do in their notebook when they're bored. Nah, man, not once it gets popular. Then everybody will think of my...
Has anyone not seen that symbol before? I have no idea where it comes from, and yet it seems like everyone just draws this symbol in a notebook. It's almost as if everyone kind of comes up with it on their own, or they hear it from a friend or something like that. I guess it's an old pen and paper meme from back before we really called stuff like that memes. I wonder if kids today still use this. I'm not actually sure.
When they see it. Whatever floats your boat. Jimmy, what is this in your notebook? Oh, it's just a little doodle. Jimmy, listen to me. We are Catholics. Now get over here and erase this blasphemy. But Mom, now!
Here's another version of the atom that I often see. Technically slightly more accurate since it doesn't show the electrons on the orbital path, but it still shows them as lines. I think this one's a little bit more streamlined, so I guess it just kind of depends what you're going for when you make your little cool atomic-looking letterhead. On that note, do you guys prefer atomic or nuclear? Atomic, to me, I just think of old school 1950s World of Tomorrow, Atomic Man and his rocket ship going to the moon and to Mars and stuff like that. Whereas nuclear, I think of it as a bit more modern and less fictitious, but people still use the term atomic from time to time, but I've never heard anyone within my industry say, hey, let's go ahead and work on some good atomic energy. But if people don't like the term nuclear, maybe we should go back to atomic. What do you think?
So, the star and crescent actually used to represent the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over most of the Islamic world during the 1800s. However, the empire dissolved after World War I, and its symbol was later adopted to represent Islam as a whole around the 1970s. Hey Rob, guess what? I'm starting a new baseball team. Isn't that the Chicago Cubs logo? Oh please, they're barely even a team. When's the last time they did anything? Nobody's using this symbol because nobody wants to buy their merchandise. Perfectly good logo. I'm taking it for my team. Couldn't that lead to a bit of confusion?
For those of you who are not into American baseball, the Cubs famous for not being very good despite being a very old baseball team, well over 100 years old.
Only because they'll see a guy in a Cubs jersey who can actually catch a pop fly.
Now we have the old radioactive material propeller. Don't actually think that's what it's called. I don't actually think it has an official name, but this is the version that I'm used to seeing in the nuclear plant, the one that is magenta. Magenta is a color, you'd see it used on this symbol, and you also see it mark like boundaries of contaminated areas, various signage in a radiological control area. It gets your attention, and the problem if we stuck with yellow is just a generic caution, like it could be guys working in a ladder overhead, Red is to do with fire protection. So magenta it's one of those, I'm going to get your attention colors, and everyone, at least within the industry, thinks it means radioactive material. Am I in the right area? Did I have my proper briefing with the radiation protection personnel before going in? I think it's a pretty easy to use symbol and very easy to recognize. I still like calling it the propeller, even though that's not what it's called.
Next up is Taoism. Alright, so the yin-yang, or as they call it, the Taijitu, actually applies to a lot of Asian religions. Just the Taoists use it as their primary symbol today. It originated in China, dating back to the 11th century AD. Although it's had a lot of different looks over the years, it's always represented the same idea of balance between contrasting forces in the world. Okay, Carl, balance of good and evil.
I had no idea of the differing looks over the centuries. That's cool. I'm sure it's changed even more. Those are just 3 examples he showed.
Let's see your design. Not bad, not bad. Alright, what about you, Steve? What the hell is that? Oh, well, you said balance between good and bad in the world, so I drew a grilled cheese sandwich shaking hands with a razor blade covered dildo. What? Okay.
Are those mortal enemies or something, or is he just taking the piss? I'm not sure.
All other questions aside, why is a grilled cheese the best thing you could think of? Have you ever had a grilled cheese? Like a real one with butter just smeared all over it, crust nice and crispy.
The best grilled cheese that I've always liked are the ones on hamburger buns. They just have that good melty goodness and a nice crisp bun to it. I think I've always preferred my grilled cheeses that way, but hey, feel free to disagree with me.
Some onions in there, get out. Okay.
And here's one that hasn't really come up that much within my career. Fallout shelters, but it kind of makes sense. Upside down radioactive material symbol, arrows pointing down towards, because they're always going to be underground in a basement or possibly a bunker if you have a fancy enough fallout shelter. By the way, if you like this combination of symbols and salmonella, please check out my video I did reacting to his video on fire diamonds. I'll pin a comment with a link to it down below. But fire diamonds are quite commonly used within the nuclear industry. So if you like this video, I know you're going to love that one.
So you know how when people are meditating in movies, they do that obnoxious Om thing? Well, apparently Om is actually the name of the popular Hindu symbol, and repeating its name aloud is said to be a sacred
I'm not sure I can make that noise.
Which is why it's said during things like rituals or yoga. The actual meaning behind the symbol is
soul, universal truth, soul, life, and the McRib is back. Yes. Cosmic infinity knowledge. Wipe with your left hand so you can eat with your right. Insert prayer here. Yes. Shorthand versions of things are used a lot within nuclear power. We haven't used ohm. Ohm doesn't mean emergency shutdown or anything like that. But to give you an example of a radio communication, we don't say hydrogen and nitrogen over the radio because they sound very similar when your transmission's a little gargled, and you do not want to mix those up over the radio. So hydrogen, we say Hotel 2, the phonetic alphabet, and nitrogen, we say November 2. Those two sound very different as to make sure you're using the right gas where you need it.
To represent a load of different things depending on who you ask or when. Basically, whatever your purpose is, it's a one-size-fits-all prayer. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty. This is taking forever. No, you know what? I'm gonna make my own religion, yeah. And our prayers, 1 syllable long. We're just gonna go, "Ood," whenever we feel like praying. That's it. Dinner table, "Ood." But how will you get any meaning out of that? It's my own word. I can give it whatever meaning I want. So I'll just give it all the meanings. It'll mean the soul. It'll mean the universe.
Well said.
It'll mean I don't have to recite any more long-winded bullshit. Anyway, pass the corn.
And here's one that's not a radiation symbol, but a lot of people seem to think it is for some reason, though I've noticed less so ever since COVID. But the biohazard, nothing to do with radioactivity. I don't know what the source of it is. Maybe that Chernobyl film, HBO series brought out some of it. They seem to think that radiation spreaded like a virus, so they might have combined the two. I guess it is possible for something to be both radioactive and a biological hazard. I can't think of a substance like that off the top of my head, but if you do, let me know in the comments. But the appropriate hazard you put on there if you were restricted to just one, the most predominant one. If it's predominantly biological, put this. If it's predominantly radiological, put the other one. On some warning labels, you can go ahead and put both and just ensure all your bases are covered.
So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. At some point, I'll do a second video covering some of the more obscure religious symbols.
And that's Wheel of Fortune. I don't know. Maybe that's supposed to be the Buddhist wheel. I'm not 100% sure about that. And there you have the Shinto one in the center. And we all know Apple's a religion. This was cool. I'm always good to learn something from the Salmonella Academy. And hopefully I was able to show you a few things regarding nuclear symbols. Please let me know if you have any obscure symbols you can link down in the comments below that you want to show up and maybe explain, or maybe some misconceptions associated with symbols that a lot of people think they are, but maybe they're not. Symbology is its own fascinating study. There's a whole art and science behind that. Today we're going to be looking at another one of the hilarious Salmonella Academy's videos called The Journey of a Beef Cow. As he goes on, I might discuss the journey of uranium from where it's found naturally to where it makes nuclear power. I wonder if there's going to be any overlap. Let's see.
Hey kids, do you ever feel like life has passed you by? Does the daily grind leave you feeling trapped in your own life like an animal in a cage? Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy some fun facts about
when you're working an outage doing 4s and 1s, that's 4 days on and 1 day off for over a month, you start to lose track of time. You start to lose concept of what a week is. So just to give you a sense of what a lot of operations crews and engineering crews are doing during an outage.
livestock while you're at it. Today, I'll be giving a tour of the life, death, and processing of the American beef cattle. Disclaimer, this video is only a basic summary of some common industry practices. No two farms are alike. Some are nicer, some are worse. I'm not a shill. Please don't get mad at me. Now,
And when I mention stuff about uranium, I'm just going to be talking at a high level.
in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light."
Good lord. It's a brick wall, too. That's crazy. So let there be light, appropriate for uranium, because they are to have come from supernovas, hypernovas, kilonovas, big explosions in space. Since the fusion from stars is not actually hot enough, even really massive stars, to get you all the way to uranium. Supernovas are, though. So supernova, then stardust, space dust that ultimately forms into planetary nebulas and condenses into a planet. Sure, that's where it comes from.
And it was good.
Henceforth you shall be called Craig.
At birth, the calf weighs somewhere between
I highly
60
doubt they name the animals they're breeding for the purpose of making into meals.
pounds. The males are typically castrated within the first couple of weeks, usually without anesthetic. The main point of this is to keep the steers mellow later in life, but it also stops their male hormones from giving the meat an off taste that the American palate isn't really accustomed to. Anyway, things started off pretty good for Craig. Drinking milk, hanging out, the life. After a while he figures out you can eat the floor, that's cool. But then after about 10 months he gets loaded into the cattle cars. If you're a history buff like me, you know that's not a good sign.
So uranium actually starts off dirtiest. The dirtiest part about uranium is mining it. Mining, it's no different than mining anything else. It might actually be less hazardous than mining coal simply because you don't have to do it as much, because the uranium fuel density is so much more dense than coal. You don't need nearly as much uranium. We're talking on the order of a few metric tons of uranium to power over a gigawatt of power for 18 to 24 months, compared to coal, which goes through several tons of railway cars every day. But it's still hazardous. Uranium itself, the radiation, isn't hazardous, but it does eventually decay into radon. So there will be some in the area. Now, granted, there's radon in the crust just in general, but it'll probably be it's going to be elevated around uranium and thorium deposits for that matter. But that's definitely the most hazardous part of the job, is the mining it.
Little does Craig know, he's been auctioned off to a feedlot 1,000 miles away. Here the cattle are packed together like sardines, if sardines were 500-pound terrestrial mammals. The menu consists of random roughage and energy-dense feed like corn so they can pack on the pounds more quickly. Overall, this environment puts a good deal of stress on the beast, which can end up taking a toll on his health. But it's nothing a little visit from the antibiotics fairy can't fix.
Well, you're enriching the size of the cow. Just like that, you enrich the quantity of uranium. So it gets milled and processed into yellow cake. You've probably heard of that before. But then it gets turned into a gas that's uranium hexafluoride in order to aid in the enrichment process. Think of it just a bunch of gas diffusers in order to separate out the relative mass. So uranium is mostly uranium-238, but uranium-235 is the real active ingredient in a nuclear power plant. So naturally, uranium-235, less than 1%, much less than 1%. But you're going to want it anywhere between 3 and 5% for a typical nuclear power plant. So you enrich it using these gas centrifuges.
Fully grown, Craig gets taken to the packing plant. This is where the magic happens. And by magic, we mean mechanically automated goring into commodities. This
I always love his use of acronyms. It's some good salmonella stuff.
is where things get messy, so try to forget that we gave this random animal a name a minute ago. In order to keep things as humane as possible, a worker will first use this device, referred to as a stunner. Here's a demonstration. This renders the beast instantly unconscious.
That sound effect sounded horrific.
Or worse, but potato.
Or worse, yeah.
Its ankle is then attached to a conveyor rail, which will gently guide the animal along the rest of its journey. First, the cow gets to talk to this man. He's called the Sticker. Can you guess what he does? If you said that he gouges out throats for a living, you'd be correct. Over the course of about a minute, the flow goes from torrential downpour to incontinent poodle, by which point our beloved bovine can continue on his way. At the next station, the cow is subjected to high voltage electrical stimulation. Hopefully the nervous system is all out of steam by this point, but if not, the boys on the killing floor will have a great story to tell their wives. Haha, just kidding. The FDA
I had no idea about slitting throat plus electric shock. That's wow.
estimates that 93% of meat worker marriages are in shambles. Who knew that 11 hours of pure slaughter every day could
Was he in the
desensitize a
bed?
man? Anyway, electrical stimulation basically works to speed up the onset of rigor mortis. Getting this process out of the way means the meat won't toughen up once it reaches the freezer.
Wow, I had no idea about that. So once it's enriched, it's put into a processing facility, kind of like that, sorta, not really, but it just gets converted into these little pellets of uranium oxide. So it's turned back into a solid. These are ceramic pellets, and then those are shaped into fuel rods. So hey, long stiff objects, just like what you're trying to do, what they were trying to do with the rigor mortis. And then that is what they ultimately get used for making electricity in a nuclear power plant.
The carcass undergoes a thorough power washing. Like the noble mortician, this hose works to make a lifetime of filth disappear. Unfortunately, though beauty is only skin deep, manure runs to the core, so the cow must be disemboweled to prevent contamination later on. And we might as well get rid of all these other gross bits while we're at it. Then the feds stick their nose in things to make sure everything is as it should be. Yup, it's a cow, finally.
So fuel is inspected by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's a little bit more invasive than that, but then saying, huh, yep, this is uranium fuel, but I like that.
Send it down the line, evacuate the spine, bifurcate the hind, reticulate the spline, and power wash it again just for good measure. This whole process from bashing to slashing to splashing takes a mere 15 minutes to complete. That means it takes the same amount of time to process 3 half-ton mammals and 1 scheduled license renewal. Try puzzling that one out. After hanging out in the cooler for a couple days, the beef is broken down into its many cuts: chuck, loin, sirloin, what have you. This is the good stuff. That'll get shipped off as is to barbecues, bar mitzvahs, and bargain bins all across the country. Then you got all these misfit bits hanging out wherever else. Still technically flesh, so we have machines pluck it off, pulp it, and use it to make hamburgers, hot dogs, and the like. Then all the garbage
Frappuccino
can't stomach is sent off to the rendering plant to be made into whatever else.
That's crazy. So one thing to point out, I kind of got ahead of the thing, so all the choice cuts, that I guess that could be your uranium fuel types, but there are bits and pieces that are left over, and it can get refed through the same centrifuge process. So using the cow analogy, you would just run all that stuff back through that same process. It doesn't really work like that for cows, but you can essentially run it through just to extract as much of the uranium-235 as you possibly can.
There you have it. I don't really have an outro, except, kind of gross, right?
Yeah, it is. And to finish this off, look on this one. So this is in the US. It says in the future it may be reprocessed or stored in an underground repository. Yeah, right now they're just stored in dry cast storage on site. Those are highly durable, and I talk a bit more about waste and dry cast storage in another video that I'll pin down in the description, but it would be really cool if we could reprocess, which is basically just recycling the fuel after it is used, because there's so much energy potential there. Alas, there are concerns about proliferation that really we could just be a whole lot more efficient with the uranium fuel cycle. Well, there you have it. There's another silly analogy I made with something nuclear and one of Salmonella's hilarious videos. Let me know what you think down below. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.